This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come about boards to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack.
Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad. I am your co-host Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today we are going to tackle a very fraught topic that is getting no small amount of news coverage at this time, and especially in the sort of arena that we have delved into on this podcast of things that are on the liminal or subliminal scale in the conspiracy realm. I think this looms rather large.
Yeah, it's the preeminent conspiracy of our day, I would say. Definitely in the mainstream press, it is the conspiracy of 2020 and of recent years.
Yeah, and not for lack of competition, we might add.
True, yeah.
Yeah. And that, of course, is the phenomenon of QAnon.
Yeah.
And a few people have asked us to do an episode on QAnon and sort of see what our analysis of it is. And, I mean, I think we were just talking before we started recording about how slippery and kind of difficult it is to sort of get a full handle on the Q phenomenon, which has been going on since late 2017 and has kind of morphed. I guess it stayed somewhat ideologically and theoretically consistent, but it has so many offshoots by nature. It's both controlled tightly by a series of trip codes that have identified themselves on 4chan and 8chan and 8kun as Q, a supposed military intelligence high-level insider. But then the community around Q is so decentralized and diffuse, and it's and is so.
Yeah. It's theoretically controlled tightly by Q. If Q gave any directive that was clear, people would who subscribe to QAnon would have to sort of follow it. But at the same time, I really do think that there are people at this point who are in the QAnon orbit who are actually skeptical even of Q himself, or I saw, just as I was researching Q for this, I came across some article that was even if Q turns out to be a CIA LARP, the revelations that you've had, the awakening you've had as a result of looking into this is still legitimate, things like that. So I think that and just because of the way that even very early on, even the original Q posts, and I personally believe that the identity of Q has changed, that the person who was posting originally as Q is not the same person posting today. Mm-hmm. But even in the early days when there was more substance what he was saying, it was still very impressionistic and open to interpretation by design. And now today, if you look on 8kun where he posts now, a lot of the posts are just stay the course, very curt, very, clipped sort of statements that are just everything's good, trust the plan, and no actual guidance or directives. So
yeah, it almost reminds me, this is kind of a left field comparison, but it reminds me when celebrities get big enough on Twitter and they can just tweet something about to turn up, and it gets like 500,000 likes and RTs like immediately, and it's like they don't even have to try. It's just they're continuing a kind of a parasocial relationship. They're just sort of maintaining that connection to their fan base, but it's like they'll post a video of like an American flag flapping in the wind. That's just some YouTube stock footage, or I think a few days ago they posted just like a rig for red in all caps, and of course there's a million different ways that you could interpret rig for red. I mean, like, is Q saying they're going to rig the election for the Republicans, or is he, you know what I mean?
Like, is it a command to like just vote, you know, or like you could interpret it in any number of ways, you know, because that's the thing. From the very beginning, like from very, very early on, when Q started circulating, like on Twitter or in social media, like it had the characteristics of a messianic movement, which is what it is. Mm-hmm. Like the messianic figure really is Trump, but Q's statements are like esoteric poetry that can be interpreted in all sorts of various ways. I saw people, you know, looking at the numerological significance of his trip codes and things like that, you know.
And I mean, I think we can get back into that. We will talk a little bit, because I feel in a weird way I know much more about the sort of the sort of Channer ops or phenomena that happened just prior to the existence of Q than I do kind of about the Q phenomenon itself in a granular way. But we will talk about how, like, you know, I mean, and we've talked so much about magic and the different kind of definitions of magic on this podcast, and the idea of like trip codes and the discovery, I think it was in 2016, of the Egyptian god Kek, who was, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but was like actually Egyptologists would describe him as the Egyptian god of chaos.
It's like a god of, for one, like Egypt is like an immense civilization. Like the cliche that gets thrown around, like, you know, it's a temporally like immense like civilization in the span of time to talk about. Like the cliche that always gets thrown around is like, we are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra was to the pyramids. You know, so it's like a huge, like, and there's great diversity in terms of the expressions of the Egyptian religion. And like Kek is, or like Kook or whatever, like, you know, is a very minor like deity that like people associated with, you know, people kind of associated with toads. So there was like a Pepe connotation, and
that was the big revelation, is that both the two synchronicities were that Pepe had obviously become the dominant mascot of 4chan by that point for many years, and on top of that, the word Kek, I believe it came. Supposedly, the history of the word Kek on 4chan was, I think it was like a Korean person was typing on a Korean keyboard, and there was some kind of glitch where I think it was Koreans where they would type LOL, but then it would transliterate as KEK. So then people just started adopting that as sort of the 4chan way of saying LOL, or even in a way like, I don't know, Kek this like up and give it more attention.
I remember that, like, in Blizzard games, people would say, like, Zergrush, like, ki, like, you know, I think that they were saying, like, LOL, but I'm like, but definitely it was, like, it's a modification of LOL, or a corruption of LOL as Kek, but, yeah, so that was discovered.
Which also almost, like, it goes back to it almost even goes back to earlier Channer ops, like the Russell League and Weave, that neo-Nazi, who was there, you know, the hacker from the early 2010s, and how, you know, I remember reading the kind of the first, you know, Gawker or Vice articles about them way back in the day, and, you know, kind of pushing all of their more sketchy, problematic aspects kind of under the rug, because they said they did it for the lulz, was the term back then.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's the idea of doing something for the lulz is very core to kind of 4chan's mission over the years.
Yeah.
To their core philosophy of that message board.
Yeah, and I think that the excitement over the idea that they were performing magic is because they felt that they had memed Trump's candidacy into being a thing. They felt that, like, by, you know, being, like, kind of semi-ironically in favor of Trump, like, especially on the poll board, which is just like really infested with are just very like racist, just a lot of disgruntled people who like, because they're anonymous, like of course this has just been like dragged through like every think piece like for the last 4 years, but I think that was the the Keck had like blessed them in some way, was the idea, which was like kind of tongue in cheek, was that there had been they performed meme magic that had caused this effect in the real world of Trump's candidacy. And I think that,
and they believed that beforehand too. Throughout 2016, they believed that they were doing meme magic. So it wasn't just after the fact that they sort of had this revelation, but they felt that they were engaged. I remember at the time they would, all these 4chan accounts would flood Twitter and say like veteran of the 2016 meme wars and stuff, and they would be fighting what they saw at the time was meme warfare, and
but of course it's all like very they would like laugh at our taking it like seriously, because it's all, again, like a lot of this stuff, there's like a tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, but that's part and parcel of it, that there's like sort of an ironic patina over it. But it also, like, there's kind of an excitement and, like, a real, like, oh, my God, like, this is, like, really happening, like, so that, I think, was the sort of, that was the vibe or the attitude or the energy of it. And, yeah, I mean, I used 4chan, like, for a long time, like, I was much more, like, I'm not very active, like, on there now, and I usually use, like, some of the more marginal boards, like, I wasn't really, like, a big, like, B person, although, like, I would go on Paul now and again. It used to be like a very like Ron Paul type of place. Yeah, like
I actually have to say, according to my memory, I think that you were the first person who ever introduced me to the idea of 4chan or showed it to me, like way back in the late 2000s. And it was, I mean, it was an edgy place that was rife with racist language and certainly with like neo-Nazis, but it was also, I mean, I had other friends too who were kind of into it.
It was nowhere near as bad as it used to be, as it is now. It was nowhere near as bad as it is now.
It accelerated tremendously.
People definitely like were all about being provocative on there on purpose, especially on B, but like it really escalated around, and I think that the like makeup of the boards changed, or especially of like the poll board, like changed around the election. I think this is part of the genesis of Q in a very, I think there's many like folds and dimensions to Q, but on a superficial level, I really do think that because there was attention to 4chan in the mainstream media, like through Hillary saying like these deplorables from these dark web sites such as 4channel, I think that a lot of boomers actually came and didn't understand, like, kind of, because there were all sorts of posts that were kind of like Q, to, like you said, like to varying degrees. Like, I remember there was one post that was like, there would be posts like, I'm a time traveler, there's going to be a great civil war where the Democrats will be led by Harry Reid, like, and they will march, on one, and they'll be like this big, and people would just play along, people would be like, oh, what happens, like, to do with this event, that's unfolding now, like, in the future, stuff like that.
For sure.
X is rife with that stuff where it's like, I'm a vampire, like, ask me anything, things like that.
Yeah. X, the paranormal board, definitely had a lot of this stuff. And it was more like coast to coast radio kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that back going into even I think the early 2010s.
The content varied, but there's a lot of role playing, and I think that a lot of people who weren't familiar with that type of discourse like flooded the board around 2016, especially boomers, and that's like part of the reason why now we're seeing Q like really suffuse boomers like so much. Like I think it's probably most popular among like older people. Like I
would say that's definitely true, though I think there's another dimension, almost the flip side of that, where I believe that not only did the boomers come to Q's lair on 4chan, but Q in a way came to the boomers by basically becoming a force on more mainstream platforms, and particularly on Facebook, where it is kind of like the boomer social media platform par excellence, and maybe the more, you would say, almost the normiest in 4chan parlance.
Yes, I think that
social media.
I think there were a couple vanguardists who were like the people who'd be like veteran of the meme wars. Like, yeah, some of those people are like 20, but like a lot of them are like, well memed, sir, like 40-year-olds like trying to be cool. Like, I think that a lot of those people were the vanguard who then we're the ambassadors of Q to, like, you know, the larger public on Facebook and Twitter and
True.
stuff like that.
I mean, I think a lot of them, I noticed a lot of them in 2016, kind of, that's where often the point of contact was you had these sort of meme lords from 4chan who probably were on the younger side, kind of flooding political Twitter right at the time when the most eyeballs possible were on it, as this crazy 2016 election reached, you know, its finale. And that's where a lot of these boomers that were on Twitter encountered these 4chan meme lords. And I think you're right, like, didn't quite understand the full scope of irony that was at play and the sort of inherent Discordianism of 4chan culture and discourse. But also, I think that Q had a lot of kind of stylistic and rhetorical differences than maybe some of its predecessors that were on 4chan that were more boomer friendly to begin with. Like, just for example, if we want to go to the latest Q post that posted on September 20th, 2020, number 4739. He just posted let me just read. It's a paragraph. Let me just read it.
Okay.
Strengthen my faith, Lord. Forgive my sins so that I may be clean in your righteousness. Make me brave so I can stand and fight the spiritual battles in my life and in our world. Give me your wisdom and discernment so I won't be caught off guard. Together, Lord, we'll win, because in truth you already have. While evil still roams, the power of your name and your blood rises up to defeat and bring us victory against every evil plan against us. While malicious actions may disturb us, we use the armor of God you have given us to stand firm. You will bring justice in due time for all the harm and needless violence aimed at your children. Until then, we remain in your presence, aligned with your purposes, and we look to you as our supreme commander and protector. Help us to avoid temptation and deliver us from evil, Lord. You are the mighty one, the one who will ultimately bring all evil to light. With you, Jesus, we are safe. Amen. So, you know, like, that could have been posted by any boomer on Facebook.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, like, the stereotypical 4chan user, like, generally, like, you know, across the various eras of 4chan, like, is someone who mostly is kind of, like, young, disillusioned, like, a little bit, like, you know, eccentric, like, and I think that the sort of style of discourse is very nihilistic. Like, nothing where it's, like, the core thing is, like, patriotism is gonna, like, really be, like, for that audience. Like, the way like,
exactly. To use another term that 4chan coined, like, people on 4chan, well, I guess we're really talking now about, like, 8chan and 8kun, whatever, like, they're too black-pilled to respond to that type of messaging. So there had to be a kind of conscious effort on Q's part, or whoever is behind Q, to kind of play. I mean, it takes a little bit of sophistication, I think, to be able to play this kind of ARG type game with disillusioned channers, but then also post this content that is, like, very Facebook share friendly. And it's like anybody that's already kind of an evangelical Christian who is, you know, supportive of Trump and maybe a little bit suspicious about, you know, the evil Democrat elites or whatever. I mean, I don't think anybody would find anything controversial about that sort of Bible prayer that, you know, he just posted.
Yeah. And I mean, like, there's nothing possibly controversial in it, but yeah, I feel like, I mean, I don't know, I imagine that the landscape of 8chan has been, like, incredibly transformed by Q, because now it's, like, the main Q hub.
Well 8chan doesn't exist, it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, right, now it's 8kun.
So now it's 8kun, which feels like a much more skeletal kind of channer board. Maybe 4chan is what's changed more, because 4chan already got left in the dust when Q moved over to 8chan, and 4chan almost has been, like, it's got too big of a spotlight on it that it doesn't have the underground kind of vibe that it has anymore. I'm sure there's still all kinds of Nazi edgelords and Trump fans and people like that on there.
Yeah, in terms of Q, and also, it's definitely become something much more mainstream, but but I do remember that 8chan has existed, like, for a while, and I remember people talking, I mean, there are lots of, like, 4chan knockoffs, but originally 8chan was, like, for people who, for whatever reason, like, felt they couldn't be on 4chan, or, like, certain boards, like, were taken away and they wanted to go to 8chan.
Didn't it have something to do with, like child porn anime or something like that?
Maybe, you know, that would make, because people
which is deeply ironic
people
if you
would
think
get
about
banned
it
for posting, like, you know, Lolita stuff, and then they would go to 8chan, you know, things like that. So that maybe yeah, it is deeply ironic. But
yeah, because that was also a thing that coexisted with kind of the 4chan world. It was like it was in a way a basket of deplorables broadly defined, in that you had like basically like creepy, like, I mean, some things were just like, you know, people with like kind of odd fetishes and things like that, but like oftentimes there was a kind of creepy, like, you know, anime Lolita kind of thing going on there.
Well, the whole like CP, like posting CP, like, you know, was a whole like thing. It was a whole meme. Like, you know, it's awful. Like, and Moot was right to, like, you know, slam down on anyone who posted child porn on 4chan, but absolutely, like, you know, the idea that this is, like, some kind of, like, back channel for patriotism, it's like, in the fight to save the children is, like, deeply ironic because, it's been a hub for pedophiles.
Yeah, and that would bring us to, like, one of the many, many contradictions inherent in sort of the Q character and kind of their selective targeting. Because I think one thing, I don't know about you, Khalid, but personally, that I'm not going to do in terms of, you know, critiquing the QAnon phenomenon is I'm not going to stand here and either snark at them or scold them that elite child sex abuse does not go on, and even that, to a certain degree, that satanic ritual abuse has never gone on in American history with powerful, well-connected people. I will grant them kind of an open door on that, because as we've talked about in multiple previous episodes, there's a lot of strange infernal smoke around a lot of different characters in the 20th century. And even as we saw, like in the Satanic Panic, like certain things were overblown. There was some fraudulent stuff mixed in there, but then there were like a bunch of people who got sentenced to death row to murder people so they could get 10,000 souls in hell. So
I'll even take it a step farther and say that even if, like, you know, there were nothing to that, I think that the impulse, like, you can't really critique the impulse to want to protect children, you know? No. Like, the idea is a noble one, and it's a natural thing that people are drawn to, which is, like, wanting to protect children from harm, because they're innocent. Like, you know, they're innately innocent, you know, they're the ultimate, you know, thing that we want to protect. You know, they maybe we think of our own childhoods, like, for whatever reason, there's a deep revulsion at the idea that children are being harmed.
Oh, it's one of the most deeply rooted in our sort of ideologically sclerotic, like, partisan culture that I think most people can agree on as a deeply held, like, visceral principle.
Yes,
that children ought to be protected.
But I think the flip side of that is that revulsion and that impulse is very powerful, and to think that people won't exploit that or manipulate it or use it is naive. Like, absolutely. You know, the very people, you know, the evil Satanists who are all out to destroy our lives and manipulate us, to think that they won't see, like, oh, you know, one way to really get people on board with something is to manipulate their need to protect their children. Like, you know, I think that there's sort of an interesting flip that can happen there. It's kind of, we were talking earlier this week when we first were talking about doing this episode about this Time magazine article, and one of the best parts of it, I'll read now. So this, you know, QAnon supporter, Arthur and Frank explain that they're not followers of QAnon. That's their last name, so these are women. Frank says she spends most of her free time researching child sex trafficking, while Arthur adds that she often finds this information on the Russian-owned search engine Yandex, you know, throwing the little thing at Russia there. But
I've seen that, a lot of people doing that now.
Frank's eyes fill with tears as she describes what she's found. Children who are being raped and tortured so that the cabal can extract their blood and drink it. She says Trump has seized the blood in the black market as part of his fight against the cabal. I think if Biden wins, the world is over, basically, adds Arthur. I would honestly try to leave the country, and if that wasn't an option, I would probably take my children and sit in the garage and turn my car on, and it would be over. Okay, so what's happening here is she's saying, I've seen all these horrible things, like, happening to children that I believe are happening, and I think that Biden is part of it. So if he wins, what I'm going to do is kill my children. Like, that is, like, the old, like, you know, there's something so poetic about that irony there. Like, she's just so consumed with the need to protect children that this is resulting in a desire or this sort of, like, weird subconscious urge to harm her own children. And that's like very strange and chilling.
And it speaks to the realness that these people feel of the threat that basically Q describes and the world, the picture of the world that he paints, which is that, they're harvesting these children's blood for adrenochrome, which has been a conspiracy theory that has bounced around on the internet for a number of years, probably since at least the 90s. And there's no evidence for it, but I think it's one of those things, almost like the Dracularity of 9/11 as mass ritual, that almost feels true, because like, for what other reason would you be systematically abusing children? Like, even the thing that they're like blackmailed pedophiles who are just sickos almost feels inadequate in some way. Like, you sort of need this deeper, either via satanic belief or that there is this like infernal sort of medical purpose of like extracting this drug adrenochrome, which actually, no, who made up that meme adrenochrome, bizarrely enough, was Hunter S. Thompson.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a fantasy sequence in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Funny. Yeah, maybe he got the idea from when he was eating a baby.
No, to be clear, filming the filming snuff films at Bohemian Grove. That was Paul Benassi who said that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, he said that there was a man that came off a plane in like Las Vegas that was introduced to him as Hunter Thompson, but he had never seen a picture of Hunter S. Thompson before, didn't know who he was, so he can't say for sure. Maybe the elite pedos were trying to blackmail Hunter S. Thompson. I know if you're an HST stan out there, I don't know how many are left, but maybe you could cling to that. But that is interesting that this kind of counterculture figure, who, as I think I mentioned before, one of his early jobs was as a security guard at the Esalen Institute in the 60s, and like spent a year and a half rolling around with the spooky Hells Angels, became kind of the original memer of this conspiracy theory, which he didn't even really intend as a conspiracy theory. And I think in his formulation of it wasn't extracted from the adrenal glands of children, but it actually set up that idea that would later be picked up by Q, that it is it's adrenochrome that is extracted from like an extremely terrified and traumatized individual, because the surge of adrenaline going through that or coming out of that gland when they're put in like a life or death situation allows you to extract this like very potent psychoactive drug.
I've heard multiple permutations of it. And again, like, these ideas are all extremely old. Like, that's the thing. Like, this is basically, like, this is Hansel and Gretel, this is blood libel. Like, all this stuff, like, is the idea of sinister elites harvesting, like, this is Elizabeth Bathory who actually did this stuff, who actually bathed in the blood of like young servants to try to prolong her life. Like, the idea, like, so that did actually happen. Not only has it actually happened, but people have always like had this notion of people harvesting the vitality of the youth to prolong their lives. I've heard that permutation of it. I heard that, of course, there's a permutation that these people aren't actually people at all, but are in fact beings from some other order of reality or from deep inside the earth.
Well, lest we forget, like, he mostly gets buried now, but David Icke, or I don't know, people call him David Icky now, which is weird.
That's weird, yeah.
I prefer calling him David Icke, but that was a whole phenomenon, like in the 2000s. If you wanted to go to the farthest edge of conspiracy theory, it was his assertion that Queen Elizabeth II was a blood-drinking lizard. Yeah. Like a Draco, basically, and all the world elites, like the royals and the very highest people, were all like, basically, we were living in John Carpenter's They Live. Yeah. Except, I don't know, there's all kinds of different theories about where these supposed reptilians come from. Some believe, I remember the hollow earth theory being kind of like, of course, a fun thing on the fringe, that like they've actually been living in caverns underneath the earth for, like, I don't know, they're descendants of the dinosaurs, I guess.
That's well, yeah, because one of the famous reptoid models, I mean, we really should do an episode about reptoids.
Oh, we will.
Yeah, we can't go to that rabbit hole now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or they were interdimensional, dimensional
or they came to Earth and then lived under the ground, you know. But anyway,
all kinds of things like that. But those were the kind of things that were flying around that had elements of them that Q would kind of pick up on and incorporate into his meta-narrative about the world. And actually, even bringing up like Hansel and Gretel and like breadcrumbs, it reminds me of that quote from S.K. Bain and I think that's maybe what I hope we try to do today, where, you know, the more astute conspiracy researchers, after a while, they stop looking at the breadcrumbs and they start looking for the witch.
Of human trafficking.
Households in northern Italy saw their water turn to wine.
Folks are quarantined, so sort of a little bonus for them.
It's a little lucky right there, yeah.
I've signed 9 pieces of bipartisan legislation aimed specifically at combating human trafficking domestically and around the globe.
The worst locust crisis in decades is ravaging East Africa, threatening the food supply for millions of people.
We're challenging foreign regimes that facilitate this horrible evil of sex trafficking.
Jharkhand police has widened its probe into the sale of babies at Mother Teresa's charitable trust's Ranchi branch.
Cardinal George Pell, Vatican treasurer, found guilty of child sex abuse.
The untouchables are not untouchable anymore. And this pertains also to bishops, to cardinals, and to the Pope himself.
We are going to do everything in our power to make sure.
And I think that's what we're trying to do today. We're trying to figure out, like, who is the witch behind QAnon. And I'm comfortable calling them a kind of witch in the Aquino sense of, like, practicing lower black magic on the public via this character who is not what they see. I'm convinced, you know, they are not what they present themselves as.
Oh, for sure. And I do think that there has been... I'm not sure what the initial... My theory on it, my take on it, is that the identity has changed. I think now, I think it might not be Jim Watkins himself, but now it really does seem to be like someone who's just keeping up appearances, you know, someone who just wants to keep this going, you know, whereas in the past there was more substance to what was being said, and I don't know whether that was someone LARPing, like, and then once it started to take off, it was co-opted, and that person just kind of slipped away. I don't know, Well,
it's interesting if you entertain that idea of QAnon, that maybe they were some kind of, you know, either renegade insider or I don't know, unstable army, you know, former army mercenary, or I don't know, a kind of Cambridge Analytica, like private intelligence group that could run social media operations, and then it's sort of, they either stopped doing it after a while or it got taken over by somebody else.
I almost think that, like, the way that I see it is that maybe there is like a liminal phase where there's someone of that persuasion, or someone, you know, like there's a psyop phase. And then the way that I see it is that there's a first phase that could maybe be seen as the LARP phase, where this starts out as something that's more like your conventional 4chan thread, or like, you know, 4chan, like, you know, FBI Anon, like that type of stuff, you know.
Yeah, we'll get to FBI Anon.
Yeah, and then maybe like people see the potential of this, and there's like a Cambridge Analytica type intervention, and now like that it's kind of become its own beast. I could see someone, maybe not him himself, but like someone like Jim Watkins kind of sustaining it.
I could potentially see that, because I think an interesting kind of an interesting thing to point out with that potential trajectory is that as maybe the sort of original auteurs behind Q like fade away and it goes into kind of maintenance mode, that's when it starts to get more popular in the kind of more mainstream adjacent or quote unquote alternative kind of right-wing media, because now we see a lot of bigger figures, including former, you know, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, like taking the oath on social media and really playing up the, like, really giving a big wink to all the QAnon supporters out there that sort of he's in on whatever the Q phenomenon is, and he's like one of these patriots that is gonna, you know, make America, you know, not ruled by satanic pedos again. But that's interesting that it's gotten a little bit more mainstream. There's now this thing that I've discovered called Freedom First Radio, which is not really a new phenomenon of these sort of weird, like, right-wing kind of conspiratorial podcasting and internet news kind of sites. that have proliferated maybe in the last 10, 15 years. And this one is a big booster. They have like multiple kind of podcasts and radio shows running, and all of them I think are to varying degrees. Either if they're not completely Q-pilled, so to speak, they are very Q-friendly or Q-curious, and they all kind of toe a similar ideological line to Q. And like one of the biggest stars about that's worth mentioning on this network is the co-host of a new podcast called The Two Mics, and one of those mics is none other than Dr. Michael Sheuer, who was the retired CIA officer who was the head of the Alex station in the 1990s. So all the stuff we talked about last episode in terms of the CIA like failing to share information and failing to stop bin Laden before 9/11, this guy was basically in charge of the CIA's efforts to do that. And he actually wrote a book that I remember reading back in high school because it caused a minor splash, and because he released it under the name Anonymous, which is interesting. Think about that. And that's before like Internet Anonymous was a thing, but he just did it because he was a CIA insider and didn't want to expose himself at first. But I think it was called Imperial Hubris. And it was this like scathing indictment of how the Bush administration had embarked on the war on terror and had reacted to 9/11, and really kind of formed the foundation of like what has been his sort of political ideology that he's promoted, which is a kind of like ultra right-wing, kind of Ron Paulish non-interventionism, but also mixed with like a capacity for using extreme military force, like if we decide to go to war. And I believe the main takeaway from that book that he ended up kind of recommending to the U.S. government was like you only have two choices in the war on terror. You basically, because you're going over to this country, you're blowing people up, you're going to piss off the Muslims that are over there, and then they're going to become more radicalized, and then it's just going to feed itself eternally. And every time you invade a country, it's going to make Osama bin Laden more popular. So you either have to completely withdraw from the Middle East, like just like pull out all the military and say like, fuck you people, we're just going to not deal with you anymore, and then you'll have no reason to attack us. Or alternatively, you have to go in with extreme prejudice and like carpet bomb them back to the Stone Age and like pummel Afghanistan and Iraq to like dust. Yeah. And firmly assert like American imperial authority, but you can't muddle the road. You can't like do a half measure. You have to just either stay home or fuck up everybody. And I remember at the time kind of thinking, I was still kind of a neophyte, in the 2000s, and kind of thought like it was a little yikes to kind of conflate those two of like withdrawing our forces, which seemed like maybe the morally right thing to do, or just like mercilessly murdering millions of people to show that we're not to be messed with. But that is basically, he's had a blog in the years since called the Non-Intervention blog, and he did post a month ago a kind of cheeky endorsement of QAnon. And it's also worth mentioning, and this is a truly bizarre thing that's come out in a few years, that the woman he is married to now is a woman named Alfreda Bukowski, who worked with him in the bin Laden unit, and I believe was accused by one of the FBI liaisons to that unit of hiding information about the Al-Qaeda hijackers from them. And later claiming to the 9/11 Commission that she had personally delivered it to FBI headquarters, but then they looked at the records and she had never signed into the FBI that day, and it actually just deep sixed it. And Alfreda Bukowski ended up being the inspiration for the character Maya in Zero Dark 30, which was played by Jessica Chastain. She's got bright red hair and kind of looks similar to Jessica Chastain, and that was kind of a composite character. But basically that movie just portrayed her as this badass girl boss, like CIA officer hero who, like, you know, basically tracked down bin Laden. And we know now that that whole movie was bullshit and like fed to Mark Bull by the CIA. But then in some strange twist, like she ends up marrying Michael Sheuer, I think maybe in 2015 or 2016. And I know before that, under the Obama administration, she had risen in the ranks to become the head of what was called the Global Jihad Unit.
Wow. Cool.
So she ended up running all of our counterterrorism, anti-Al-Qaeda, anti-ISIS kind of operations at the CIA. I don't know if she retired or if she's still there. And I remember the podcasters or there were filmmakers that interviewed like Richard Clarke and stuff, and they were the ones that exposed her name for the first time, and they got in a lot of trouble. Like the CIA kind of went after them, so can't go after us though because the name's already exposed. But like now Michael Sheuer is like podcasting and basically not just kind of endorsing kind of the whole movement of Q, but also saying some pretty scary other things and just things that are characteristic, I think, of people who imbibe sort of the Q worldview. Though I think with him it was pre-existing. Like, for example, I think we had chatted about, you know, some of these. He pretty much openly called in a recent episode for a CIA or military patriot to assassinate George Soros.
Cool.
Yeah. Which, you know, I mean, I've said before, I'm no Soros fan, but that's like pretty brazen to be just like casually calling on like a mercenary to go like murder him, because in his view he's the one, you know, orchestrating all these Antifa BLM riots in other areas. He brings on a guy and they talk about the history of Antifa, but basically conflate like the entire history of communism and Marxism and even like liberal protest politics just into one hegemonic like evil force that has been going on for at least several hundred years. He basically says that Hegelianism was all about dethroning God.
Oh, yes, that was great. I listened to like one of the two Mike's podcasts that you had posted, and they had some dude on. I want to say his name was Jonathan Federer or Joe Federer, or was it Bill?
Yeah. Bill Federer. I think it was Bill Federer.
Yeah, and he like, you know, some fool who like writes, you know, books about like the exceptionalism of America or whatever, how America's the greatest country in the world, and he was just going on about how Hegel invented something called the Hegelian dialectic. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, you got thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So what this is when you get people who go out in the streets and they riot and they cause a whole thing and they make everyone so scared that people will give up their freedom to just make it go away, and that's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And you know, and the hosts and like his mic guy are just like, you know, sounds like there's nothing new under the sun, and it's just like, the Hegelian dialectic is when you do Antifa to make the suburbs go away,
to increase whatever, you know? Chaos. It's like extremely ahistorical and
like
just assumes
dumb,
that
incredibly stupid. And talking, and this whole thing he was showing his book about how like the first democracy is like what he calls the Hebrew Republic, which, to be fair, I think is an idea he took from actual, like, Enlightenment philosophers or whatever, but he's basically referring to the period, describing the Book of Judges as being, like, you know, a republic. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'll take King Saul.
And I think he even favorably well, I guess, I don't know if he specifically refers to this judge, but just to give you, like, the flavor of the Book of Judges, I think it was, like, Jephthah was one of the judges who actually, this almost feels QAnon-ish a little bit. He basically promised to sacrifice the first member of his family or whatever that would walk outside of his house.
The first thing that he saw or whatever. The first
after returning home, after waging war against the Canaanites. So he said, in exchange for victory, I will sacrifice like the first person I see when I come home. And so he did win and came home, and the first person to walk out of the door was his daughter, his beloved daughter, and he was like, no. And I guess the daughter requested to like go up to, I don't know, Mount Carmel or something and like weep over her virginity or something for for 6 months, and then she would come down and he would sacrifice her, and he did. And I guess I don't know. I read elsewhere that was sort of some biblical scholars have interpreted the Book of Judges to be sort of a subtle critique of human sacrifice. That
well, the point of that is that people are, or the point of it is often seen to be that people were becoming overzealous and misguided in their practice of religion, and that is an example of that, and that's kind of the sort of degeneration that sort of eventually culminated in there having to be a king. You know, the classic problem of when people, give up their freedom, and they, but, that's all biblical.
He also says that that he demands that Trump order Netanyahu to arrest Soros for being a literal Nazi war criminal.
Right, yeah.
And and, we all know what he's referring to, the fact that, George Soros, his dad got him a job working for, a wealthy friend of his, and his job was to kind of inventory confiscated Jewish property in Budapest throughout World War II. And George Soros was, a teenager when he was doing this, and, of course, he was Jewish, so he was pretending, I think, to be the son of this Christian banker, businessman.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I it's annoying because, again, there's so many things you criticize George Soros about. And even his reaction to it on a 60 Minutes interview in the 90s, I did find a little bit, problematic, where he said, he said that he didn't feel guilty about it because... And that they were the happiest years of his life, which actually Sheuer kind of quotes. But Sheuer kind of and then he quotes a kind of fake picture of George Soros that has been going around for years of, a young man in an SS uniform and being like, this is George Soros.
Right,
and
the meme. That's very much a QAnon thing where it's just this completely out of context meme. Yeah, and I'm not even sure if he did say it was. Maybe he did, but I don't
I think that was all in the same 60 Minutes interview that got deep six, because I think his PR people were like, ooh, this doesn't play very well. So let's it's just when Bill Gates says creepy shit. These billionaires, I think, sometimes forget how out of touch to humanity some of their things sound how just sort of detached and dissociated from normal human empathy they are from their perch of power and influence. But to say that okay, he's literally a prosecutable Nazi war criminal that Israel should kidnap immediately, and okay, first of all, I don't know, are you just being cheeky, Michael Sheuer, or do you actually think that anybody would actually do that? It shows I don't know if it's an out of touchness, with this guy who does
it's similar to the QAnon stuff in a way, because it's all about they also would like to see Soros killed. Or that's another interesting thing about Q, is that some people believe that George Soros or Hillary or whatever, they already have been executed or whatever. They already all this stuff actually has happened, and the people we're seeing now are doubles or clones. This is not a totally marginal idea in the Q sphere, which is an interesting wrinkle in the prophecy failing thing, because all these people were supposed to be arrested or sent to Gitmo. Doesn't seem to have happened, so I guess one alternative is just trust the plan, no, it's gonna work out any day now, and the other one is to think actually all those promises have come true. It's just an illusion that they haven't.
And I find it very hard to believe with a lot of and that there were softer versions of that, actually Hillary's wearing an ankle bracelet, she's under house arrest. Right. There was a house arrest thing, I think maybe in 2018
at HW's funeral, where they got some note, and W, I guess, looked disturbed or something, and that's supposed to be the note where it's you are finished, we have it all, signed Q or whatever, so I there's a lot of stuff like that,
and I just don't see in what world would that even strategically make sense to secretly arrest all of these people, but then
why are they permitted to have clones? Why, if the whole thing is that they, this great red pilling or this great awakening is going to happen. Again, it's a channel for personal needs or personal grievances, the idea that people are going to come and apologize to you, and when this great awakening happens, this great day that is yet to come, it's a reprisal of many typical sort of narratives or ideas of, it's a perversion of a really standard concept of this awaited day, of reckoning. Yes.
And I don't know to what extent the more kind of mainstream of the Q believers subscribe to those kind of theories.
Well, not to the clone stuff, but they all the unifying aspect of it, I think, for everyone is that there is going to be this day when like all the libs have to watch Hillary facing the firing squad or being hanged or what, and they have to all come and apologize, or they're all going to know. Like, that's the one refrain, like, I hope you can handle it when, so that, I think, is a unifying thing, that, like, eventually, like, it's all going to come, it's all going to come down, it's all going to come out, and everyone's going to have to deal with it, and then they'll be sorry that they ever mocked me,
It is, I mean, and that was actually, there was a word for that, or a term for that on 4chan earlier, and I can't remember if maybe FBI Anon was the one who kind of adopted it and popularized it, but it was the day of the rope.
Yeah, well, that's also another thing where, like, journalists are going to be, day of the brick, day of the rope. I think that was a lot of the time used for, like, what would happen to all the journalists, because everyone, in that sphere really hates journalists because fake news and everything, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I think that's like, and there's many modifications of this, or permutations of it, especially in the Chan sphere of, like, the happening. For instance, I almost thought that was, when you were saying this is a term for this, I was going to say, the happening.
Oh, yeah, the happening.
Yeah, that was another thing. Like, that was more of a, like, people would post memes of Ron Paul with, like, it's happening, like, every day would be, like, it's happening, this is the, like, a big thing prior to that was, like, this is going to be the financial collapse. Like, this is going to be, like, the big version of 2008 when everything just collapses, that was the big thing that was awaited for a really long time, was the happening. And, now it's the Great Awakening is, like, what it's often described as.
And, I mean, as you said earlier, maybe they kind of feel that the the real Great Awakening is sort of the knowledge that you accrue along the way.
Well, yeah.
Rather than this big moment, which is often a thing Q people will say about like you said, about the value of Q, is that, it opens your eyes to all of these different topics that people didn't know about, that the media won't report about. And while that, on the face of it, that seems somewhat true, I would say, as somebody who, without the help of a Q pointing things out, had to drudge through the swamps of, like, 2010's internet and conspiracy websites to sort of sift through kind of things that were maybe bullshit and things that were real, and went through that, like, kind of harrowing process. I think it's a little too pat and a little too cute to just say that, this mysterious account is going to just shine a spotlight selectively on these various things, and then I'm going to be enlightened. But it's ironic. Like, they think that, in a way, like, following Q sharpens your critical skills and your research skills. That's what they think maybe, like, the breadcrumbs thing is useful for, is that, no, Q is all about self-empowerment. Q is about letting you go out and do the research. And first of all, if you're trying to disseminate specific, information or trying to expose crimes that are going on, I don't know if that is, like, the best strategy, to kind of vaguely drop a bunch of things that could easily be misinterpreted and then kind of, shoot out, like, a smattering of references and stories, and then highly politicize them before anybody has the time to, like, really critically digest them. I don't know if that's actually, like, empowering to the masses. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that this definitely does have, but, the use of the term the Great Awakening is very apt, because, of course, that harkens back to the other periods in American history that have been known as the Great Awakening. And I do think that it is true that, not maybe the idea that the sky's going to open up one day, or Trump's going to make a broadcast and declare that he's rounded up Obama and Hillary, et cetera, and, like, Soros and all these conspirators, and, like, they have everything, and they're all going to the gallows. Like, maybe not that, but I do think that we are actually experiencing something like a Great Awakening, a, like, very, like, spiritual moment, like a spiritual revival, and Q is a symptom of that. And I wanted to read this thing that I always think about when I talk about Trump. And Trump is interesting because, almost similar to what you said about Soros, there's something extremely seductive about Trump and I think that one of the most seductive things about him, is the sense of grievance, the sense of vengeance against people who others feel wronged by, the tribalistic aspect to him. And, one of the most seductive things about him is that he owns the libs. Everyone does hate the mainstream media. Everyone does feel that these people are venal, that they're insincere, that they, all sorts of things. Like, everyone has some kind of grievance against these establishment figures, like these sort of thought shapers, and the mainstream knowledge class, So I think that is one of the main things that gets people on board with Trump in general. And I, wanted to read this quote. This is from René Guénon, who's not like someone who I fully endorse in every respect, but who I think is definitely one of the most interesting traditionalists of the kind of early 20th century, as part of that sort of larger movement. We'll probably talk about him later in an episode that's more about that time, but this is something that he said specifically about, something that was going on at his time, which is kind of a rise in sort of neo-spiritualism. And what he says is, the reign of the counter-tradition is in fact precisely what is known as the reign of the Antichrist. And the Antichrist, independently of all possible preconceptions, is in fact that which will concentrate and synthesize in itself for this final task all the powers of the counter-initiation, whether it be conceived as an individual or as a collectivity. It could even, in a certain sense, be both at the same time, for there must be a collectivity that will be, as it were, the exteriorization of the counter-initiatic organization itself, when it finally appears in the light of day, and there must be a person who will be at the head of the collectivity, and as such will be the most complete expression and even the very incarnation of what it will represent, if only in the capacity of quote-unquote support to all the malefic influences that he will first concentrate in himself and then project onto the world. He will obviously be an imposter. This is the meaning of the word Dajjal, by which he is usually designated in Arabic. And since his reign will be nothing other than the great parody in its completest form, the satanic imitation and caricature of everything that is truly traditional and spiritual, nevertheless he will be made in such a way, so to speak, that it will be entirely impossible for him not to play that part. His time will be certainly no longer the reign of quantity, which was itself only the end point of the anti-tradition. It will, on the contrary, be marked, under the pretext of a false spiritual restoration, by a sort of reintroduction of quality in all things, but of quality inverted with respect to its normal and legitimate significance. After the egalitarianism of our times, there will be a visibly established hierarchy, but an inverted hierarchy, indeed a real counter-hierarchy, the summit of which will be occupied by the being who will in reality be situated nearer than any other being to the very bottom of the pit of hell. This being, even if he appears in the form of a particular single human being, will really be less an individual than a symbol, and he will be, as it were, the synthesis of all the symbolism that has been inverted for the purposes of the counter-initiation, and he will manifest it all the more completely in himself because he will have neither predecessor nor successor. In order to express the false carried to its extreme, he will have to be, so to speak, falsified from every point of view, and to be like an incarnation of falsity itself. In order that this may be possible, and by reason of his extreme opposition to the true in all its aspects, the Antichrist can adopt the very symbols of the Messiah, using them, of course, in an inverted sense. And the predominance accorded to the malefic aspect, or more accurately, its substitution for the benefic aspect by the subversion of the double meaning of symbols, is what constitutes his characteristic mark. In the same way, there can be and must be a strange resemblance between the designations of the Messiah, al-Masih, and of the Antichrist, al-Masih. The latter are really only deformations of the former, just as the Antichrist is represented as deformed in all the more or less symbolical descriptions that have been given of him, and this again is very significant. These descriptions are indeed particularly emphasize the bodily asymmetries, and this implies essentially that they are visible signs of the actual nature of the being to whom they are attributed, for such things are in fact always signs of some interior disequilibrium. This is why certain deformities constitute disqualifications from the initiatic point of view, but at the same time it can easily be imagined that they are qualifications in the opposite sense, that is, from the point of view of counter-initiation. The very name of the letter implies that it moves in opposition to initiation, consequently in direction of an increase in the disequilibrium of beings, leading finally to the dissolution and disintegration previously referred to. The Antichrist must evidently be as near as it is possible to be to disintegration, so that one could say that his individuality, while it is developed in a monstrous fashion, is nevertheless at the same time almost annihilated, thus realizing the inverse of the effacement of the ego before the self. Or in other words, realizing confusion and chaos is against fusion and principal unity, and this state, as represented by the very deformity and disproportion of his bodily shape, is actually at the lower limit of the possibilities of our individual state. so that the summit of the counter-hierarchy is indeed the place that really befits him in the world upside down that will be his. Furthermore, even from a symbological point of view, inasmuch as he represents the counter-tradition, the Antichrist is no less necessarily deformed. It has been explained that the counter-tradition can only be a caricature of the tradition, and caricature implies deformation. Moreover, if it were otherwise, there would be no outward means of distinguishing the counter-tradition from the true tradition, but the former must bear in itself the mark of the devil, so that at least the elect may not be seduced. Besides this, the false is necessarily also the artificial, and in this respect the counter-tradition cannot fail, despite its other characteristics, to retain the mechanical character appertaining to all productions of the modern world, of which it will itself be the last. Still more exactly, there will be something in it comparable to the automatism of the psychic corpses spoken of earlier, and like them it will be constituted of residues, animated artificially and momentarily, and this again explains why it can contain nothing durable, a heap of residues, galvanized, so to speak, by an infernal will. Surely nothing can give a clearer idea of what it is to have reached the very edge of dissolution. So, wow. Yeah, that's a lot, but I always think of that when I think about, like, these times and think about figures such as Trump and Q. And you can see, like, kind of the problematic aspects of this, where there's a focus on sort of the physicality and physiognomy, which are, of course, very big
grotesque
themes in esoteric traditions. But at the same time, yeah, so... yeah, and I think that the whole idea of like a counter hierarchy and a counter initiation and the sort of mock spirituality and mock tradition is very apropos to what we're talking about, and very much, I even saw when I was going on 8chan, I saw something that was like Trump's first day in office, and his birthday, like they're exactly, he turned like 77.
He was
he was 77, 7 months and 7 days old, sevens, say these things, and I think that it's very, it's very, pertinent to these types of movements. For me anyway, this is something that always resonates with me, and the idea of like the hyper individualism, but also to the point where it's almost like the dissolution of the self. I think that's interesting, and like again, there's an inbuilt defense against this, where like you don't want to be overblown about like this Trump and Q stuff, because these are all symptoms of like a deeper structural issues like in our society, like it's not like contained within one being, but I think that is reflected in this understanding as well. But anyway, no, that's a very interesting passage to ascribe to both Trump and Q, and kind of the simultaneously messianic and kind of antichrist aspects of their character and their message. One obviously has to reflect the other, and Q definitely has aspects of being mediumistic, in the sort of 19th century spiritualist sense, like you're saying, like he's a guide to these people, he's the medium through which they access this sort of invisible world, and through which they initiate, and they get deeper and deeper, in this universe. But a lot of the time, people experience it as being lost, like their personalities being destroyed in a dark way.
We look at tomorrow and see unlimited frontiers just waiting to be explored. Our brightest discoveries are not yet known. Our most thrilling stories are not yet told. Our grandest journeys are not yet made. The American age, the American epic, the American adventure has only just begun. Our spirit is still young, the sun is still rising, God's grace is still shining, and my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come.
Family members and stuff will describe it in this way, like what's happening.
Yeah, when people get to the point where they end up kind of, like marriages dissolve, relationships fail, families are split apart over this belief that is fostered by basically being on the internet, being glued to like this screen, this as we've discussed before, this fucking MK Ultra screen that was developed by the military in Silicon Valley. I mean, it's ironic that it's like a high-level military guy talking on this platform that there is a lot of evidence that it was infiltrated almost from the very beginning, 4chan and all the Chan boards, by like military intelligence, private intelligence kind of types.
I'm certain that it was because, originally there was the whole idea of like anonymous, like hackers on steroids, or the idea that there was going to be like some kind of dangerous threat coming out of 4chan. So I'm
yeah, and I mean honestly, the anonymous like phenomenon period has had these spooky kind of connections and aspects to it from the very beginning. I mean, they first jumped on the scene. What was their first thing? Was protesting Scientology?
Well, yeah, but that is like the real first thing, or like the first major organized like anonymous activity is the Habbo Hotel Raid, which is like a children's game where a bunch of people joined as avatars, avatars of black people with afros, and assembled their avatars in the shape of a swastika and stuff, and would do disruptive stuff online.
Was that? I thought that was on Second Life.
No, it wasn't Second Life.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there might have been raids on Second Life, but it was definitely Habbo Hotel. And,
okay. I do remember that being a thing though in like the mid 2000s.
It was
forming into a swastika.
Yeah. And, because that was kind of like provocative type of humor. But the idea of Operation Chenology, that was a big thing that happened in 2008. I was actually it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I was at like the first like real life anonymous protest.
I remember that.
Like at the, Scientology like building in New York, And and it was very like, honestly, ironically, like even though it was 4chan, it ironically was very much Reddit in the adjectival sense, like the sort of personnel who were there, but the demographic that was there. Like, it was very much you, sir, like, the type of, like, people who, like, quote memes in real life or whatever. Like,
and maybe kind of edgy atheist, like, edgy kind of Reddit atheists. Yeah. It
was very much like, for sure. And, I mean, I was young at the time. Everyone there was relatively young. But that was, like, when, we're going to use our, like, lolzy ability to, like, do these crazy raids, like, to do something good for the world. Like, in real life, we're going to bring down Scientology. And that's, like, where the whole idea of, like, anonymous is these heroic hackers,
hacktivists.
Like,
that's where the term. I don't know if it explicitly came out of that, but the idea of hacktivism, which, as we saw, then jumped into to the point where most of the Twitter accounts that I saw were recently revived this summer, that were basically like You're Anon News and You're Anon Central. They started. Under Obama, they became kind of the digital vanguard of a lot of kind of U.S. covert operations activity that was going on. I remember they very famously, I think they were kind of toying around with the so-called Green Revolution in Iran in 2009, and then I think moving on to Algeria and then Egypt. Of course, they were very heavily involved at like hacking the defense ministry and all these things, and that was also a time when there was this kind of big, very positive coverage in the mainstream media from places like, CNN and the New York Times about this kind of Facebook revolution, the Twitter revolution.
Right,
and at the time, like, it was very uncritical coverage and really presented as, oh my God, like, I think we've mentioned this before, like, wow, like maybe everything sucks, but maybe the technology that's being created by Silicon Valley and, being pumped out to everybody, maybe this will create a better, more democratic world where people under oppressive regimes can, petition their leaders and gather, faster than the security forces can stop them. And, isn't this wonderful? And the list of people that kind of jumped on board and like cheerled that was like pretty extensive. But then, of course, they moved on to Libya. They started attacking Muammar Gaddafi's government and enabled this like NATO invasion backed by U.S. warplanes and like sort of Al-Qaeda mercenaries to basically take over the country and then murder Muammar Gaddafi and turn the country into an absolute hellhole. And then they moved on to Syria, so they were very active in hacking the Assad government's networks and things like that, and doing DDoS attacks, and kind of got this like cred as like, whoa, like watch out, expect us. Like, whoa, these guys are hardcore.
I feel like I should note, though, that there wasn't, like, really an actual like, the whole idea of an organization called Anonymous started out as a joke. Like, that was supposed to be a joke that was based on the idea that people misunderstood the fact that everyone was anonymous on 4chan. Like,
True.
That was, like, a whole, like, and certainly at the time of Project Chenology, there wasn't really any, like, actual organization at all. And there was a lot of people hated it, like, and thought it was lame and got bored of it like relatively quickly, and like started out being for the lulz, but then it ended up being kind of like hard to like go against. Like there wasn't really even very much hacking involved. So this whole new phenomenon of like people representing themselves as like, oh, I'm anonymous and like we're in this bunker, we're gonna bring down XYZ like that. Yeah, it doesn't really have anything to do with how things were like at that time.
Well, I would say you're right about like in the late 2000s, but I will say like once you got around like say like 2010, because we forget that a couple of one of the biggest whistleblowing hacking leak story of that era was WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange, publishing the collateral murder video, and then and of course, how could we forget Chelsea née Bradley Manning and their hack disclosures, which I think that involved a whole group of anonymous related hackers that if you had to pin like an actual group of people that were kind of connected to each other and were doing kind of these high-flying hack operations, there was a small core of people. I think one of them's name was Sabu, and I'm forgetting the name of the guy who actually spoke with Chelsea Manning when she was in the military and kind of coaxed her to giving over all of these documents, these State Department cables in 2010. And basically that's what Manning did. And then those things got released by WikiLeaks. So that was a seminal moment, because up until that point, WikiLeaks had like released some things about, obviously they showed like this war crime happening in Iraq, and they seemed to be mostly going after the U.S. as their kind of target. But they also, they had this very kind of utopian idea of radical transparency, and that if, secrecy was the enemy, it wasn't like power itself or powerful interests or economic, interests or even kind of nation states, but it was like the urge to be secret was kind of what the problem was with every government in the world. And that was a whole drama that, like, I'm so kind of questionable of nowadays, especially with the way Julian Assange, the things he ended up doing later on in 2016, and even his trial today, which, like, in a segment of kind of the alternative left gets, like, breathless cover. Like, every time he, like, farts in a courtroom, there's, like, a million think pieces about how, like, you need to, like, donate money, and, like, this is the most important thing ever, and, like, if Julian Assange gets convicted, oh, my God, like, everything's going to be over, and they're going to come after you next. And, well, sure, maybe like that they're setting some bad precedents by prosecuting him. He is such a sus figure that and he has been not, WikiLeaks has been absolutely not transparent about what their involvement was, like with like the Podesta emails and all kinds of other things where they like played a role. I do believe they played a material role. Whether Russia was connected to that is, I think, kind of a toss-up. But I think if Russia did any meddling, it probably would have been involved in kind of getting WikiLeaks the Podesta emails to, like, I don't know, get back at Hillary or something. But it's very hard to tell, like, like it's very subliminal jihad. Like, what side are they really on? They claim to be above politics, yet they meddle in politics constantly.
They're not.
They're not. And there's people that have had, like, kind of weird, like, crypto-fash kind of connections to WikiLeaks. Israel Shamir, who's based in Germany, is like I want to say he's like a Jewish guy who converted to Islam and is kind of a Nazi. Like it's very bizarre, and
that's an interesting name to keep if you're going to convert to Islam. I feel like that's
and then be a Nazi on top of that. Yeah. I might be jumbling some of those factoids, but I know Dave Emery has talked a lot about the susness of like WikiLeaks and that guy in particuar. And
from like, Dave Emery saying someone is a Nazi
it's pretty par for
really,
the course.
Not really meaningful.
For sure. But Julian Assange, it should be mentioned, grew up in a very weird kind of MK-ish kind of like white supremacist cult in Australia. That's why he has the white hair, because his cult leader stepfather had the white hair and had all these children that like all had identical haircuts to be just like him. And also anybody that was a fucking hacker in the 80s, like hacking into like the Pentagon and telecom networks and stuff, who actually did get caught when he was like 14, like he could have been an asset from the time he was a 14-year-old. And maybe he's like an asset on a loose leash that that kind of does these like wild things that, and maybe he's not protected. That's what non-official cover is in the CIA or in other intelligence agencies. Like, you're a deniable asset. You can get thrown into jail for doing what you do. They are not going to claim you as an agent. And that, that can get into very tricky world very fast. But going back to the anonymous people like Sabu and I want to say like it was like Adrian Limo maybe was the name of the other guy. By the way, this whole group, they got turned by the FBI in the early 2010s, and I think Sabu was the one that ended up snitching on all of his other Anons that were actually in this kind of group. And then a lot of them ended up going to jail, and I think a strange number of them like dropped dead of heart attacks like in their 30s, like over in like the last 5 years. Like, they're all dead now, which is kind of funny. But I definitely also, just to point out that the release, if you want to kind of look at it from a different perspective, the State Department cables that Chelsea Manning stole and gave to Anon, which gave to WikiLeaks, which posted that. That was a story in America, and people were kind of like, oh, that's bad. But it wasn't necessarily a lot of stuff that you'd be super shocked that the State Department and the CIA were doing, like leaning on foreign governments to like help them with stuff, or they withhold aid, things like that. It mostly showed a pattern of kind of either abusive power relationship where the U.S. government was like ordering around other governments, or it showed the complicity of certain, particularly Mideastern governments, their complicity with sort of the U.S. empire. And so that ended up being the biggest kind of geopolitical impact of Chelsea Manning's leaks, was that it actually did, I think, spark the first protests in Algeria, because people were pissed off that the government was doing all these secret, shady, corrupt things with the Americans. And then that kind of took off, fueled by Facebook and Twitter and all of these things. And then eventually it blew up into this conflagration that ended up knocking out one of our most persistent kind of geopolitical frenemies in the region, Muammar Gaddafi, and almost ended up knocking out Bashar al-Assad, who was another geopolitical problem that people in the Obama administration kind of wanted to dispense with. And certainly the Saudis and Israel and the kind of like the Israel GCC like kind of alliance, like, and Turkey as well, were very adamant along with like certain EU countries and the US in kind of toppling so they could, I think part of it had to do with, building a new natural gas pipeline from Qatar through, I think, Jordan through Syria into Europe, which would also cut off some of the new pipeline projects that Russia was planning in terms of supplying natural gas. And I think Ukraine was associated with that as well. Another kind of psyop color revolution that happened, which blew up after, I think, the natural gas deal was decided by Ukraine in favor of like the Russian offer as opposed to the EU offer, and then poof, like this Nazi-aligned democratic revolution happens. So like that's all a long way of saying that just the idea of like Anons being on the right side of politics and marshaling like masses of people on the internet to disrupt the world, to disrupt the real offline world, has a pretty fraught and suspicious past, even before we get to QAnon.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, I don't know, maybe do we want to, since we're already talking about like what laid the groundwork, do we want to move up to maybe like the immediate predecessors to QAnon, which would have been...
Yeah, we can talk about some of that stuff.
Okay. So in 2016, there was a character that popped up on 4chan who called themselves FBI Anon, and this individual had a lot of kind of substantive similarities to what would become, like a little over a year later, QAnon, in that basically the FBI Anon claimed to be an FBI agent that was working on the investigation involving the Clinton Foundation and Hillary's mysterious email server that was destroyed or wiped back, after the whole Benghazi thing. And they came on to 4chan to basically say that, it is so much worse than you guys think. Like, we've discovered political corruption at the highest levels, bribes. Like, I think they did mention child trafficking, sponsoring wars in the middle, like illegally, funding terrorists and like the wars in the Middle East and all these kind of things. And they came and posted like a number of times in kind of early to mid 2016. And then they kind of disappeared. But then they did come back in February 2017 after Trump was elected, and did like an AMA where people asked them, various questions about, Hillary. Like, I'm seeing here, just to give you, and he made kind of a lot of predictions. Like, for example, in July 2016, on one of his first AMA, somebody asked, "Will Hillary be indicted?" And they said, "There's intense pressure for us not to do so. I am posting from a position of near anonymity and enough plausible deniability to evade prosecution, as we've all been given gag orders. There is enough for her and the entire government to be brought down. People do not realize how enormous this whole situation actually is. Whether she will be or not depends on how much info about others involved gets out, and there are a lot of people involved." So that I think one thing you can tell right off the bat is that whoever this character is, they're much less kind of over the top in their style than QAnon.
Yeah, to me, reading this post is 100% a LARPer. This is a LARPer. To me, I think it's a LARPer. Like, for instance, what poll is liked by the FBI? Elaborate, please. Someone asks. Someone says that, he gives an indication that poll was liked by the FBI. And he says, "Poll is an amalgamation of minds from various geographic and demographic factions. We study very intentionally the ideas which emanate and gain prominence on the board, as well as which ideas other organizations try to promote, which ultimately get defeated. JIDF, which is, of course, Jewish Internet Defense Force, for example, is highly unsuccessful at making poll pro-Israel. Because every once in a while there would be threads like, poll, why are you not pro-Israel? And there would be threads like, why haven't you converted to Islam yet? Like, we believe in, oppressing women or what, stuff like that. And most of us just enjoy the posts in general. We like to see how close to the truth everyone is, and we occasionally let our true nature slip. That, to me, is like, this is a LARPer. I
think it's definitely a LARPer in the sense that I do not believe this was an actual FBI agent who was on the Hillary case, giving you an inside scoop.
Right.
I could see it much more possibly, if we want to get speculative, that maybe, we know that the company Cambridge Analytica was doing so many shenanigans throughout 2016, and basically disseminating fake news, various kind of targeted advertising on Facebook, particularly, of people they saw as, Trump voters, and had they developed this kind of sophisticated algorithm that could, almost give you a tailor-made sort of almost like tailor-made propaganda down to the individual level based on algorithms of what you had searched for. They could build a profile of a person that could almost certainly predict what kind of political messages would resonate with them and which ones would kind of turn them off or not move them. And they employed this, and this has been totally subsumed in kind of the mainstream American media by all this loose talk that Russia meddled and Russia did this, Russia psyop. But I know from everything I've read about Cambridge Analytica, they invested way more money and effort and resources into doing their kind of psyop campaign than the things that have been found that Russia did, pretending to be Black Lives Matter Trump supporters or whatever, kind of not very sophisticated psyops that Russian-backed, firms were caught doing. This was much more sophisticated. And I'd have to wonder, if not Cambridge Analytica, then a similar kind of private intelligence, data analytics sort of psyop company could launch this as kind of like a trial balloon or like a beta test of entering onto a popular online forum and pretending to be a whistleblower and seeing people's ability to believe it. I mean, or, testing it.
I think I would make a slight modification to what you're saying, in that I think that the phenomenon of Q, when it really took off, that was where I would almost see someone like that intervening to take it to the next level. But most of what I'm in FBI Anon, most of what I see from him is very much typical of stuff that could almost be maybe some group could observe this and see how popular these ideas were, but these type of things, it's hard to draw a line because this proliferated so much on those types of forums. This is very similar to an AMA, I'm a vampire, AMA, I'm a time traveler, although of course it's more down to earth. But for instance, take this thing, FBI Anon says, Obama and HRC do hate each other. HRC hates black people. And then someone replies to him, WTF, man, keep that shit quiet. You'll gain her votes here by saying that. And FBI Anon replies, blacks are violent and generally impulsive, but they are not all bad. And they can be, for lack of a better term, domesticated. Thomas Sowell has made note of this. This to me is like a poll. What they would call
sounds like a poll tard.
Yeah, exactly. Just playing, but I could definitely see someone observing this and later on observing Q. And then, because I do remember, I remember actually being on poll, around that time, because I was interested in, the meme magic stuff. I was interested in poll during the election, not because I was partial to, Trump, but, just by, I had a habit of going on there, procrastinating and stuff. So, I remember seeing people talk about Q's trip changing and things like that. And I know, I distinctly remember early on that Q's trip changed multiple times. And in fact, I believe the reason why QAnon is because originally, people who have trips aren't usually known as Anons. FBI Anon was an Anon. He didn't have a trip.
Did he not have a trip?
I don't think so, because that's why he would be FBI Anon. Otherwise, he would...
Well, I think you can name yourself and have a trip code. It's an option. Q has the letter Q on their name.
Yeah, but I think the reason why he's called QAnon is because originally he, was actually Anon and didn't have a trip. And only later did he get one, I think. I think the very first posts that were signed Q were actually Anon posts.
Oh, okay, I see. It wasn't in the header yet.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah, it eventually got established.
Or you can even name yourself without giving yourself a trip. So that's also possible. Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
Anyway, so I think that it is possible that there is the instrumentalization of it, on a larger scale, bringing it someplace that's not self-contained. I think that is something I would locate that. My personal belief, again, it's all very murky. We can disagree on this stuff. There's room for interpretation. But where I would place that stuff is in the transition off of the chans, into the larger social media sphere is where I would see the this type of stuff. I think that once people saw how excited the new sort of 4chan audience, during the election could be, how excited they could become that these type of threads that were very prosaic and almost not really taken fully seriously by the people engaging with it. People joking, that you can see people in the FBI non-threads joking around with him, but once they saw how the new audience that was being gained by people like Hillary saying beware 4chan, how excited they would get by this stuff, then they'd be oh wait, we can really turn this into something.
When a criminal is already as rich as they can get, then protecting their ill-gotten gains becomes the priority. Angry citizens tired of being poor are a major obstacle and can revolt if they suffer enough. The criminals needed to prevent this. So they diverted attention to the last remaining competitor, the people of the world. You and me. We were not happy being ruled by criminals and having to work 3 jobs just to survive. They know we won't accept it. So they use their control of the media to set black against white, woman against man, young against old, Muslim against Christian. They convinced us we were the problem so that we would fight and destroy ourselves. To get it done faster, they attacked all aspects of humanity that make us strong. Like family, using their influence over culture, they popularized lifestyle choices that led to a surge in broken homes, lost youth, and substance abuse. I could talk all day about how else they deliberately weakened us, and it would turn your stomach.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention the other formative event that came on the heels of FBI Anon, which is really kind of, I would say, the biggest bridge to the Q phenomenon that was on 4chan, which of course was Pizzagate.
Right, yes.
And again, we go back to who kind of triggered Pizzagate. It was WikiLeaks that triggered it. Pretty much single-handedly. Not that people hadn't been talking for a long time. Like, as I've said before, like, I was investigating a lot of elite, sex rings, pedophile rings, stuff like that had been going on in the 80s, and was, like, aware of Jeffrey Epstein, which I think
you were definitely into it well before Pizzagate, for sure.
Yeah. And Pizzagate was something that it's like, that was... It was close enough to all those things I had already been researching that I sort of dove in and rode the wave of Pizzagate for a while, like a little bit to my chagrin in retrospect, because there was so much coming out and it had such a high stakes impact because it started coming out basically in the last month leading up to the election. And it introduced this whole nother level of, like, not just that Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation were kind of involved in political corruption or financial corruption, but that in these emails, perhaps, there were allusions to the kind of trafficking networks that it seemed like people like Epstein were involved in, and that, I was aware that, the Bushes had, like the Larry King, Craig Spence pedophile ring in Omaha and D.C. in the 1980s, and the Clintons and Bushes are so tight together that it was too tantalizing to not kind of to dive into and see, like, what was going on here. And the way that Wikipedia was disseminating these emails was almost tailor-made for maximum confusion and frenzy and kind of impact. Like, they must have known at a certain point. If they didn't know right away, they must have been aware right away that after the first.
You mean the way WikiLeaks was tailoring?
Sorry, I forgot what I said. The way WikiLeaks was doing it, because they said at one point that they tweeted out, like, stochastic terminator algorithm has been activated, and I think they explained that a little bit, but what they basically were implying was that every day there was going to be a new batch of Podesta emails, and they had some kind of algorithm that was going through this, like, huge archive, and it was picking out emails that had keywords that were based upon, like, things that people were searching about with, like, the Podesta emails hashtag. So in a way, it was, like, designed to be kind of this feedback loop of research.
And it definitely did, because I don't know if they encourage people to seize upon the idea of pizza. Like, I mean,
no, not before. So it was somebody on the Chans that noticed it first.
Well, yeah, definitely. Like, the idea, that association, the idea of the pizza code. There is no real firm basis for the idea of the pizza code, even though, like, I definitely, like, will.
I would somewhat disagree at least in far as cheese pizza is concerned. Cheese pizza, CP, that's been a thing on the internet. It's not hard to imagine pedophiles using those kind of. That's a very. But I think things like the handkerchief colors and things like that. That's much more. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. These people kind of came out, but like you said it yourself earlier.
Actually, the idea of flagging, like, certain fetishes with handkerchiefs, like, is a thing. But I think that, like, a lot of, like, the whole thing, like, the whole, like, notion where, like, oh, we've determined that definitely, hot dog means little boy or whatever, like, that stuff, like, the whole correspondence thing, like, that code or that, like, that legend of interpreting the people, like, that is not really based on anything. Like,
you're right.
Like, the whole thing of, like, the map, like, it was a weird email, but my interpretation of that was, like, that it was some kind of pocket square that had a map on it, which, like, I have seen things like that before. But and,
the
like,
pizza-related map.
That was the weirdest, like, the most, like, perplexing email. But
it had a map on it that was pizza-related. I know there was. I think we could. I certainly can still acknowledge, and I think Pizzagate, like, it ended up being kind of a psyop that directed people away.
Fully a psyop. I won't deny the fact that there's issues of VIP sex trafficking rings. There's issues of child exploitation at the elite level, people who are untouchable, who victimize children in various ways. Sure, but the aspect of it involving the code of pizza, I remain unconvinced by that.
You really can't kind of say either way. I think besides saying that some of them are legitimately odd and appear to be maybe a kind of slang or code word for something. Maybe. Do you think it's easier to play dominoes on pizza or something else?
I've seen all these emails so much going through this, but the way that it's on alcohol versus on weed, that's the way that he was using it, saying if I'm on this, will I play better? I think that is an unusual idiosyncratic way of speaking, but at the same time it's a big leap to say I'm going to be playing dominoes means satanic killing and lasagna means child or whatever, that's all a big leap.
And I think there was something so liminal about a lot of those emails, and a lot of it was, it was also, it's hard to extricate from all of these very rich, powerful, connected people smugly chatting with one another, and just how kind of infuriating it is just on the face of it.
And there are people that everyone hates. No one likes Tony Podesta. No one, as we saw in 2016, I guess there are some people, but a lot of people very much just like Hillary Clinton for very legitimate reasons. And I think people came to those emails and were really looking to find something truly deeply damning, and they were gonna find it the stochastic Terminator algorithm, whatever it pitched out to them, they were gonna find something in.
And I think I would question to what extent the sort of the thinking behind the actual WikiLeaks team, the way in which they were disseminating that information. Was it really just an algorithm
encouraging it eventually? Maybe it was some ancillary account that was calling itself WikiLeaks, but I do feel there was a very close association between Pizzagate and WikiLeaks.
I think I remember now that I think what they did is they tweeted something about spirit cooking, which is actually, that was the opening salvo of Pizzagate.
That was a big deal, yeah.
That was the first thing. Before people found the Comet Ping Pong and the pizza code, people discovered this email where Marina Abramovich was inviting Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother, to a spirit cooking party at her apartment in New York, and I think asked is your brother going to be able to attend my spirit cooking party? And then people looked up because Marina Abramovich is kind of a sus witch, and all of her art is disgusting and weird.
And the point of her art is to evoke that stuff, it's certainly,
she's very Angarian in that regard of she definitely wants to what if I put a model on a platter and covered her in blood, and then we pretended to eat her, wouldn't that be the role of the artist just that art world bullshit.
She sucks, and actually a lot of artists hate her because of her politics outside of any kind of occultic alignment, her politics around the control of her work and the presentation of it in museums are very bad, but and her attitude and her smugness about how revolutionary her work is just. But anyway, of course, as we talked about in other episodes, there is a very deep historical connection between this world of performance art and avant-garde theater and the actual occult. Kenneth Anger being a good example.
Exactly. And I think it's safe to say, with all the dust is settled now, that is it's curious and it's interesting, and I think it's fair to say that she is one of these people that probably does have a genuine interest in the occult. very
for
long-term interest. Like, a lot of her performance art has involved this, and I think just as we look at Kenneth Anger, to simply dismiss it, it's like kind of a fun, interesting aesthetic choice that she's making that has like no kind of ideological underpinning behind it and no intentionality, you know. And then when you add that to, she's inviting all these super rich, powerful power brokers to her apartment to do a spirit cooking dinner, and of course we have no idea if she's actually going to do the sort of purported spirit cooking recipe that was in the original installation of this piece, where she talks about like mixing like tears and blood and cum together and like drinking it. It's still like, what the fuck are these people like aren't the Podestas supposed to be Catholic? Like, what? You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
yeah, I mean, it's a thing because, like, yeah, I mean, art and religion, like, are deeply intertwined. Like, they're things that act on a symbolic level, or, you know, a higher level of experience, and I mean, they're deeply historically intertwined. Like, they operate together. And I think that, like, when people, you know, and I think that is kind of where Pizzagate gets into interesting territory, because it brings people who like definitely aren't like literate, like, you know, people who have like circulated in like the like avant-garde art scenes or whatever, like for that stuff's like not as shocking because like people are desensitized. But if you're like a boomer, like from, you know, Kansas or whatever, and like you like work like, I don't know, like at an ice cream shop or something, like seeing that type of thing is stunning and horrifying and bizarre. Because it's deliberately, you know, using these religious symbols in a very, like, provocative, or this sort of religious or magical language in a very provocative way. And yeah, and like, it does become, especially for a lot of, like, artists who don't cleave to, like, traditional religious beliefs, and I think, like, it exposes a deep rift, I think, for a lot of people, because, like, yeah, a lot of elites who like consume this type of art, and for whom it is kind of a you know, status symbol almost to be involved with, like, you know, they obviously don't have the same spiritual sensibilities as someone who is going to be like repulsed, or at least like, you know, myself, like roll their eyes at this type of stuff or find it vicious in some way.
There's something, you know, that they're at least kind of cool with, or they maybe they want to be involved.
Like, yeah, it shows they don't take it like they're not upset to like be like someone invoking Satan or whatever, you know.
Totally,
like,
which is like worthwhile to point out, because, you know, it's not like these people walk around saying they're, you know, they're into mysticism, or you call it. Though John Podesta is really obsessed with UFOs, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, well, you can, like, for individual people, you can make like different, but like, yeah, by and large, like, you know, a lot of people, you know, who consume this type of art, like, are, yeah, again, like people who love Kenneth Anger, you know, they might be interested in it, they might like see its value, but they don't necessarily believe in its power. I don't really know what Marina Abramovich's position is on it.
Well, I was going to point out a little bit about her background, which is interesting, is that her great uncle was Varnava, the Serbian Patriarch, or the Serbian Orthodox Church. And she was raised by her grandparents until she was 6 years old. So I guess like I think particularly her grandmother, who is deeply religious, and Abramovich said she spent her childhood in a church following her grandmother's rituals, candles in the morning, the priest coming for different occasions. And she described her parents, who were Yugoslav partisans during World War II, as, quote, red bourgeoisie, who were given positions in the post-war Yugoslav government. So she has this interesting kind of duality of like her parents being kind of like good communists and kind of well-off, like, you know, Yugoslav government officials, and then her kind of grandparents' generation being like extremely high up in the Serbian Orthodox Church. So, you know, I mean, she comes from this kind of very, you know, religious background. So I wonder where like the flip kind of happened, or if there was something weirder going on with like her grandparents' sort of whole generation and her great uncle.
I mean, it'd be interesting to take a dive into that, but like, you know, on the surface, like that is like the persuasion of the like US like coastal like art world. Like they're not interested in like religious contemplation. It may be something like exotic or like, you know, a lark, but, you know, they're interested in like provocation and intrigued by the occult, and like, you know,
and that is like very well summed up in, I think, the art taste and the art collection of Tony Podesta, who I feel like is somebody who got like kind of a short shrift on Pizzagate in the sense that like people stopped focusing on him more when he is such a, just on a political level, is such a suspicious, he's like he was one of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington, and his brother was in and out of the Clinton and Obama administrations as chief of staff, and had all these, connections, and was like close with Marina Abramovich, and was this famous art collector. He had like a soundproof basement where he could like show like video art installations. He had that strange Arch of Hysteria kind of bronze statue that had a kind of creepy similarity to a position that Jeffrey Dahmer put one of his victims in, like a headless body, like bent backwards, and all of these from another former Yugoslav artist that was like a lot of children that just have this creepy kind of, honestly, like kind of MK Ultra Monarch Project kind of vibe to it, of like children in like war zones who like look like scared, like they're about to be like abused by somebody. It's just weird shit like that. And then of course, like one of the hard hits that I stumbled on when I was like riding this Pizzagate wave was that Tony Podesta was like really, really long time good friends with Dennis Hastert, the former Speaker of the House, who is right now in jail for being a pedophile.
Right.
And they were best friends in college. They went on an overseas like semester abroad, I think, to Okinawa or Japan. Yeah. And they became really good buddies there. And then like they stayed in touch throughout. They both ended up working in Washington, and this like dumb, kind of like not very intellectually impressive high school wrestling coach became the Speaker of the House in the late 90s. Interesting that he was Speaker on 9/11 and afterwards. Would have been a reliable guy if you were blackmailing him, I think. And Tony Podesta, maintained this like friendship with him. And I think there were a few veiled emails in the Podesta emails of like, geez, just heard about Denny, like driving across town now. So strange. It's like, I don't know. So maybe they had no idea that, Denny Hastert was this like rampant, pedo wrestling coach all these years. And he had been getting blackmailed for a long time by one of his victims. And, apparently they didn't know about that. But I thought that was another interesting kind of interlock, that they had this long, very personal, close relationship with one another. But again, like Pizzagate just spun off in this kind of other direction, focusing on the pizza parlor, and then kind of demolished and discredited by that young guy who ran to Comet Ping Pong and like shot into the wall and then got arrested and said he was trying to like free the pedos from the basement. And then that became, even to this day, like that is sort of in the public record as like sort of the proof that you should never question whether there are pedophile rings like operating at the highest levels of government, because some crazy dumbass from North Carolina will drive to a pizza place with an AR-15 and take a shot in a wall, which, like, not saying that's like entirely something to brush off, but I don't know, given the magnitude and the cases like Epstein that we know about, like it seems a little bit disingenuous for the corporate media to like, oh, that's why we can never talk about any of this stuff again. It's all ridiculous. You're all wearing tinfoil hats, and shut up. We're going to ban you on social media if you talk about this.
There were definitely a few people, like, even leaving aside Comet Ping Pong, like, what do you think? Like, there was like children locked up in the basement or whatever. Like, there were definitely people who, like, that I remember reading about that, like, Muslim Trump supporter who like had like a triangle on his pizza parlor.
Oh,
like,
Besta Pizza.
Yeah, because like, of course, a triangle was like a slice of pizza.
It was an inverted. It was a triangle within a triangle.
Yeah, but okay, like, that's the thing about
I know. You can't go very far with that, but I'm just saying that it had an uncanny resemblance.
In the absence of any other indication, like,
it was two doors down from Comet Ping Pong, and it did have this sort of uncanny resemblance to the leaked FBI document, and of course, maybe grain of salt, but that document had been floating around kind of for a few years on the internet as like, oh yeah, these are the symbols that pedophiles use online. They didn't necessarily mean that like entire businesses were going to be fronts using these symbols, but that like on message boards and stuff or the dark web they'd be using it, and it perhaps it was just a very unfortunate coincidence that this triangle within a triangle was on the pizza.
It's a very elemental symbol, like a triangle, like even a triangle within a triangle. Triangles are basically the most elemental shape, so
sure.
That's
I wouldn't ascribe that to any regular triangle, but the one within it, I don't know. It's just, I guess you might be right about that. Then of course there was I'll just say, if there's one case of triangles that did not get very good attention, that I think I discovered it either first or early, which was another character that didn't get talked about a lot during Pizzagate, which was the Canadian billionaire Frank Giustra, who was like a mining billionaire who had a lot of who's very good friends with Bill Clinton and had a lot of interactions in various mining deals in Kazakhstan. And what they co-founded together, which was, I think, it's the Clinton Giustra Enterprise Partnership, and it's technically still around. I don't know how accurate it is. It was founded in 2007, and this guy, if you remember that kind of like Uranium One scandal that never really panned out, where we were like selling all our uranium to like Russia. I can't speak to like how much of bullshit that whole thing was, but there were some like shady pay for play kind of things going on with, like, I think it was Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, doing deals with Giustra, and with Clinton kind of like being the mediator, like hashing out the deal, and them all being buddies. But I looked into like the charity work of Frank Giustra, and one charity that he had, which, could be innocent, but he ran a charity in Vancouver, where he's based out of, for like at-risk and homeless youths and teenagers, and kind of like, safe halfway houses and things like that. So like that's, maybe he just wants to help at-risk kids who are vulnerable and susceptible to human trafficking. Maybe that's, not a bad thing. But then I found that he had founded an NGO that was based out of some islands in Greece, and it was designed to basically be a home for refugees from North Africa and the Syrian civil war. And they were building refugee camps, and the name of this foundation was Elpida, which, not great. But the symbol that I found that is plastered on all the buildings for this foundation is literally just like a triangle within a triangle, like almost exactly what the FBI document said it would look like. Like, there's nothing else. It's just the triangle within a triangle. It's called Elpida, and it is basically a NGO set up by this billionaire as a refugee camp particularly for women and children fleeing the Western-backed chaos in the Middle East and North Africa in 2014, 2015. And I don't know if it's still, the website's still there. I think they eventually got rid of the logo, but that was just kind of like if you're gonna kind of go out on a limb, why don't we look at this guy who's like so high up and tied into the power structure that is, I don't know. There were other things about Haiti and like the Laura Silsby kind of thing, where this woman was caught trafficking like 30 children across the Dominican border from Haiti after the earthquake. And then in some of the Podesta, it was either the Podesta or the State Department hacked emails, where Hillary Clinton's State Department was like very on this and helped kind of get this one off and get her back to the U.S. without getting charged. So again, maybe they're just doing a favor for like a random person, but that was like a real case where cops caught this woman, this white lady, bringing all these children across, trying to get them across to, same island, to Dominican Republic, and claimed that they were all orphans, but in fact they were not all orphans, and a lot of them had families that were like looking for them. And maybe she like lied to them and said she was taking them to like a school or something, but was trying to like take them out of the country. So that's another thing. It's like there were some things like that were kind of, there was smoke hovering over this whole Pizzagate thing, but then it got funneled way too much into like, is there a basement underneath Comet Ping Pong? And
the thing is, like, if it's like, it's not like the issue is that it isn't necessarily like, no big deal to make these conclusions wrongly. That's the thing. Like, if it's based just on certain like iconography or like terms, like, for instance, the Elpida like example, like, it's definitely an unfortunate coincidence that like, it's called Elpida, which sounds like pizza, or is
or pedophilia, like,
oh, I see. And then like, music, but like those two things like are in a way like very circumstantial, like as I mentioned, like, and so then if you say like, let's look into this guy, and like a bunch of people are like, you're a pedo, like, you know, and like, then that's like, you know, that guy's life has been like pretty like ruined or like, you know, really messed up, like over like, you know, for no real good reason. Like if you find something, then it's like, you know, very vindicating, but if there's something to it, then like that's pretty messed up, like what you did, you know. So like, you know, I feel bad for like, I do feel bad for the Best of Pizza guy, because I do assume that he is in fact innocent. You know, looking at his logo, like I could see how you would design this as a pizza logo, and it does seem to be like, you know, to me, definitely a coincidence, but you know, an unfortunate coincidence, and like, you know, so I think that that type of thing is,
and like we don't know, like
okay.
we don't know like how much involvement he had. He could have hired a freelance graphic designer who put that in there for whatever reason. I think that even Alefantis, who's like very litigious, so maybe we'll bracket everything with allegedly here. Even he had and again, maybe I think, you know, having people barge into his pizza shop with guns, like not the way you want to kind of go. You don't want to encourage that type of thing, because it's stupid. And I mean, honestly, like nobody asked any questions about his I'd say admittedly bizarre sense of humor on his Instagram account, like having a picture of a baby with a bunch of rolls, like thousands of euros, like in rolled up wads with prescription pill bottles, and being like, going to Europe for the weekend, party time. Is like, and then like the hashtag kill room, like the little girl with her hands like taped to the floor, like all the just creepy kind of satanic, like the little coffins that he was taking pictures of, or the guy holding the baby with like the yellow necklace and saying hashtag chicken lover. That's kind of like, whoa, man, like that's a pretty that's a clear term that has been kind of used. Like there's that NAMBLA documentary called Chicken Hawk from the 90s, which I think has Allen Ginsberg in it, and you know, that's like a kind of term that has meaning, and it's hard to kind of parse like what he meant if it wasn't a reference to like pedo shit.
What does chicken lover mean? I actually
it means that you like, well, like a chicken hawk is a related term of like a pedophile who's attracted to like, you know, prepubescent boys, like a chicken being the term for a child. So like chicken lover holding a baby is just kind of like, I don't know, like, are you just making kind of, you know, like all these comedians in 2010 that were making pedo jokes every 5 minutes? Or is there some, and also I think the biggest thing about him is that he was the longtime boyfriend of David Brock, which was the guy who I think ran Media Matters for a while, and then ran the Correct the Record kind of counter right-wing propaganda, like PSYOP kind of online brigades during 2016, and was very close to the Clintons, even though he used to be a Republican, and like attacked the Clintons for years before just like flipping sides and becoming like one of their lackeys. And he's a very dark, you know, kind of Karl Rove of like the wealthy libs kind of character around Washington. And the fact that these guys were also involved in, like, I think there was a case in the DC courts, I think from a few years before Pizzagate, where like one of their ex-lovers was trying to like extort money out of them, like blackmail them, and then they took it to the court and kind of had it like dismissed, where a guy I think was trying to get like a few $100,000 out of them. And it's kind of like, well, you know, maybe that's just how it goes with, you know, powerful people and, you know, hangers on, and somebody's going to sue you. But it makes you kind of wonder, like, what were those two guys getting blackmailed? You know, what was the subject of like that whole extortion scheme? But again, it's like you can only go so far with that before you start, you know, really like prying into this person's life without sufficient evidence. And
yeah, and like again, like everyone hates like rich, like out of touch, like politically pernicious, like, you know, Hillary Democrats, like, you know, David Brock. I remember he was like super like anti Bernie Sanders and like spread like malicious lies about Bernie Sanders, like
for sure,
busting in, like, you know, so like everyone like despises, or like, not, I guess not everyone, because there are some people who like love those people, I guess, but like there's definitely a huge contingent of Americans that despises those people, and like for very legitimate reasons, and like, you know, it's just red meat, like to think like, oh, you know, they have a pizza parlor where they have like, you know, a bunch of children like locked up, but That is like a jump, from the other.
It is.
Why we despise.
So and it ended up also distracting. And the last thing we'll say about like Pizzagate is it distracted from all of the much more thoroughly researched kind of pedophile scandals that had either already been going on or had come out even in the few years leading up to Pizzagate that didn't get any real attention until maybe much later. And, some still should be like spotlighted more, prominently. But, like I said before, like the Franklin, Larry King, Craig Spence kind of network, Jimmy Savile, which was coming out like in from maybe 2010 to like 2014. And actually I think the editor of the New York Times at the time of Pizzagate, who was like very, I think they kind of popularized this fake news term to refer to Pizzagate, but he was actually working for the BBC a few years prior and I think had covered up a lot of the Jimmy Savile kind of story or basically like put the kibosh on it. And now, so, there's a lot of space there for, you even had some of the same people that were covering up these things, but but then like the true scandal in Belgium where there are allegations of royals, abusing and even murdering like young people that were kidnapped. Like I said, like the related Dolphin Square Westminster inquiry, which was headed, I think, by Home Secretary Theresa May, which miraculously sort of found nothing, that I think was launched in the wake of Jimmy Savile's death because there are people like MP Cyril Smith, former Prime Minister Ted Heath that were sort of outed as pedophiles after their death, and DynCorp child trafficking in the former Yugoslavia during like the NATO interventions there in the 90s, and then of course like Aquino and Epstein was the one that was most relevant, though I think to Trump and Clinton, and that didn't really pop up at all during the whole Pizzagate imbroglio.
It was like that, I think, was the real turning point where like that, like anything to do with that got sort of pigeonholed into this world of like, I remember like, Cernovich was like very like a big booster of that.
I was just going to say that these right wing, all these MAGA guys like Cernovich and Posobiec, I don't know why they're all like South Slavic, but weird coincidence,
I remember you like during your Pizzagate like phase like retweeting something that was like, if Bannon knew, then like Andy knew, and like Andrew Breitbart Andrew Breitbart like personally screamed in your face like during Occupy to like stop raping people or whatever.
He did. Like, I've been looking for that tape, but I can't find it. But I swear to God, I was filming it and I was there, and he was screaming, "Stop raping people!"
But like the whole idea of and now with QAnon, which is very much the successor to Pizzagate, like a big element of that is like the messianic fervor around Donald Trump, like that he is going to like drag these people in like in chains and like he is this great hero, when of course like like he's as complicit in like the Epstein stuff, I would say, as Hillary is. Like, just the fact that like Trump has stuff like Jeffrey's like a great guy, and he loves the ladies. Like he likes them on the younger side, just like I do, or whatever, like
no doubt about it. Jeffrey like enjoys his social life. Yeah, weird shit like that. And then like the Katie Johnson lawsuit that was also like did not link up with Pizzagate around the same time, even though they both came out similarly and maybe in the same month.
Just the fact that Trump has a quote where he's like, Jeffrey Epstein's like sexual proclivities are such and such, like just like mine, like it's just like it's a lot, like but
yeah, it is.
Yeah, like so, but now like there's a double like there's a pincer move where like on one hand like the people who are deeply invested in like that kind of thing are like Trump worshipers, like deep like religious reverence, and the people who are against Trump, like they can't engage with it because it's very much like it's become like a polarized, like corrupted thing.
Well, that's what I really hated to see when it's like once people like that started flooding in, and it's kind of started to realize like, oh, this is being completely taken over by MAGA people. And at a certain point, it's like you just kind of have to cut bait from this whole thing, and like and think that it's regardless of what it started out as, now it is being like colonized and reappropriated by, and it came out later that Cernovich was working for Alan Dershowitz in 2017 and trying to manipulate the release of Discovery from one of the Ghislaine Maxwell trials that would supposedly discredit Virginia Roberts Giuffre for which I don't think it did ultimately, but it was just bro, you're Mr. Pizzagate, but now also you're you're this rapey bro, with your guerrilla mindset and everything, but on top of everything, you're working for Alan Dershowitz, the most credibly accused person in the entire Epstein scandal besides Epstein and Maxwell. And
in fact, I bet gorillas are PETAs, now that I think about it. I'm sure that dominant male silverback gorillas go for
if you follow whatever. That logic, yeah. I mean, if you want to have if you want to model your approach to sexuality on gorillas, then you're probably going to do some problematic shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I don't really know what the gorilla mindset is even supposed to be. It's. Yeah,
it seemed, I think, what is it? The original red pill, right? I mean,
it's
we
weird
could probably talk about the etymology of red pill and how it's bounced between the pickup artist community and QAnon and pole Nazis and it kind of, I mean, there's synchronicities between all of these movements.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel with kind of stuff we talk, the evolutionary stuff and the whole the importance of apes, in a lot of these sort of esoteric or theories, or because of course the whole impact of evolution, maybe in our Urantia book episode, some of that comes in. It's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting to pick a gorilla as something that you want to resemble mentally. Not to demean the intelligence of gorillas,
not being speciesist, but
obviously they're very intelligent animals, but I feel they're more strong than they are a role model intellectually. I don't know, but anyway.
Have you ever wondered why we go to war, or why you never seem to be able to get out of debt? Why there is poverty, division, and crime? What if I told you there was a reason for it all? What if I told you it was done on purpose? What if I told you that those who were corrupting the world, poisoning our food, and igniting conflict were themselves about to be permanently eradicated from the earth? You might think that an idealistic fantasy. Well, let me tell you a story.
I think we're getting to about the end here in our discussion of Q. What I thought we might do is read the other post from yesterday, or Q drop as they would call it, that is kind of a more classic example in contrast to the kind of phoning it in post that Q has been making. This is at least a kind of substantive one, and maybe we'll just end with a close reading and dissection of where the role Q is playing right now in the fever in the last 2 months coming up to this election, and maybe try to analyze it in the light of things we've been discussing.
I'm excited because I haven't heard it, so
okay,
take it away.
All right. There's a lot of, brackets and underscores. I guess I should mention them because it's kind of his syntax, but I'll try to read through them.
Yeah, they might be important too,
You're right. There's all kinds of little subliminal codes that the Q believers think these brackets sort of speak to. So, okay. This is drop number 4738 from September 20th, 2020, dropped around midnight, 12:18 Eastern Time. This morning. And okay, so it starts with let's see, a Twitter status from somebody named Dr. Simone Gold. It says, Nevada is now the 7th state to quietly reverse their decision to block hydroxychloroquine prescriptions for COVID-19. Physicians in Nevada can now once again prescribe HCQ as they deem necessary. Governors lied and restricted medicine that could have saved lives. They should be held accountable. And it's a post from the Nevada State Board Pharmacy. So as Q often does, he'll reference something in the mainstream, media, and then do this. So he says, how do you, quote, extend lockdowns, bracket, economic hardships, unemployment, fear, death count, Dementia Joe, etc., in order to paint narrative mail-in voting, bracket, when did narrative start? March? _early _planned needed to, quote, save lives, brackets, plus ballot harvesting, in order to generate a future narrative election day +1, which cast doubt as to legitimacy of POTUS win, bracket, constitutional crisis, another bracket, quote, not all mail-in ballots counted, quote, how many mail-in ballots lost or did not arrive in key battleground states which could have returned a different result, quote, we must investigate who cast a vote but it did not register, quote, we must go door to door if needed, internal bracket, ballot harvest, quote, our lives are at stake, quote, the sky is falling, in order to legally challenge, delay results, enact riots and chaos in an attempt to overturn, bracket, coup d'etat. All caps, crimes against humanity, what role will select military inserts play, brackets, the bribe, bracket, playbook known. What did we learn from past attempts? Spying, bracket, surveillance plus campaign inserts plus WH White House inserts. Mueller, impeachment. Why did it take an outsider to finally deliver the start of peace in the Middle East? Why did it take an outsider to finally deliver the start of finally holding China accountable? All caps, the disease called corruption, running all craps red, Q.
So, for one, I'm just disgusted at the notion that, like, this is peace in the Middle East, like the freaking UAE making, like, a meaningless deal with Israel. Like, okay, yeah, thanks. Anyway, I still don't feel like this is the original Q because, well, at least his whole angle has changed because I thought that the Patriots were in control. Now he seems like on his back heels a little bit, you know, like he seems worried that the cabal might try to do this coup d'etat, but I thought that the whole, like, you know, the white hats were in control of everything, you know, what's the fear of the coup? Like,
well,
you know?
I feel like there is this kind of triangulation that goes on with Q where they want to kind of inflate the power or they want to inflate the amount of work that Donald Trump is doing to root out these elite sickos. But at the same time, they also want to kind of inflate the threat of the remaining deep state, which for a variety of reasons Trump has been unable to fully vanquish yet. It's the
classic thing of the enemy being like extremely weak and extremely strong, you know, like, yeah,
exactly. Because if you were to accept that, you know, if the deep state was beaten, then you'd have to explain why all these Democrats are running around and why, you know, Sleepy Joe is ahead in the polls and all these things that they ascribe to the Democratic deep state, like the BLM riots and Antifa and civil unrest. You'd have to ask yourself, like, well, if Trump has already won, then why are all these things happening?
Yeah.
So then you have to kick it to the kind of flip side of like, well, he hasn't won yet, but you can't say that he hasn't done anything because then that kind of undermines the whole narrative that Q and Trump are aligned and that Trump is making progress. It leads you to kind of ask the question, like I think you mentioned that some Q people are now kind of questioning, I don't know if they're questioning Trump, but kind of questioning Q. And like you don't want people to wonder like, well, why isn't Trump locking up all these elite pedos? Why isn't he doing it? Are they blackmailing him? Which honestly is like not that outlandish if you think about the circles that he ran in.
Well, that's the big thing. That's the big thing with Q from the beginning. Like, you know, why? Like now, I feel like it's much easier if your faction or the heroic faction and the theory isn't in power. Because, you know, if you're sort of these heroic patriots who are like resisting this overwhelming force, but also like Trump is the president, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, it's hard to reconcile why Hillary isn't hanging from a rope yet, you know, like why aren't we able to? I saw an amazing YouTube video when I was preparing for this where some dude was saying that Hillary had already been arrested and hung by her. You know, they love to use like the fancy terminology of like, you know, hung by her neck until she is dead or what, you know, like to sound like official. And they said that Bill Clinton was killed by firing squad, but he was too cowardly to actually face the firing squad, so he shot in the back. And soon there's going to be like a pay-per-view event where like you'll have to pay $1 to get to see, you know, all the tribunals and to get to see, like, you know, all the executions and stuff.
So Q is promoting pay-per-view snuff films?
Yeah, like, and also, like, how dare you, like, you know, these executions of, like, these major public figures, like, you're gonna charge? Like, why not just, just make it free? But anyway, another interesting thing about this one is that Mueller, I don't know if Q ever actually directly supported this idea, but it was a big Q idea early on that Mueller was actually a white hat.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Was maybe one of the most spectacularly kind of haywire predictions of Q.
Yeah.
Was that Mueller was a good guy.
Right, yeah, and they were actually working together, but this guy, I don't know if Q ever actually directly promoted that. It was a big thing, so I doubt that he actually, like, you know, went against it, but now he obviously is saying that Mueller was bad.
That was a tough one. I mean, a bold prediction to kind of make. I mean, I think in a sense, like, almost the opposite is true, is that, like, Mueller is evil, and he wasn't going to... It's like Mueller, if I had to speculate, I think Mueller was there to do a kind of a narrow focused investigation into certain activities that could kind of reflect negatively on or could connect heavily to Russia, but any other aspect of Trump's corruption, which involved other countries, including the UAE, where he and confirmed convicted pedophile and Trump associate George Nader and Eric Prince, who went on Breitbart Radio during Pizzagate and claimed that Anthony Weiner's laptop had child porn on it a week before the election, had all met before the election, I believe. I think they might have met in, like, the Seychelles Islands with a representative of the UAE royal family to kind of work out something which was never looked into by Mueller. So I think that if you ask about, like, what was, maybe it was the Saudis that had, like, a pre-existing cozy relationship with the Clintons and the Bushes, but there were other Gulf kingdoms, like the UAE, that meddle in American politics that were literally sitting down. But it's like, I don't know if maybe Rachel Maddow did, a big long rant about that one day, but it definitely wasn't emphasized as something that really, like, the public or the media or Mueller or anybody should look up on. It's like, oh yeah, that, like, and this guy George Nader is like, he got caught, I think, like with child porn. It got thrown out on a technicality, like maybe back in the 90s, and then he got re-indicted on child porn, like in the last few years. I think he might be in prison now. But again, like, oh, Trump, the pedo hunter, why is he hanging out with this guy who has, like, a very well-established history? Probably has connections in, like, the arms dealing intelligence world. He sounds like that type of person. But it just, bad boy Mueller just didn't quite, didn't pick up on that scent, I guess. So very risky for QAnon to kind of try to project, like, this kind of patriotic. I mean, Mueller was a Republican, so it's funny that liberals like stand him so hard. And I think we mentioned, like, the last episode that there's an interesting kind of like parallelism going on with, like, establishment liberals believing in Mueller and whipping themselves up into their own conspiracy frenzy, which admittedly is not as extreme. It's not as far out. It doesn't, it doesn't seem like as ripe to, like, foment, lone wolf terrorism or civil war. But it's still, like, the way that Russiagate became an obsession of Democrats in the last few years had more in common than I think they would like to admit with Q.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, all that stuff, like Mueller, she wrote, like, it's very much the same. Very, like, the whole idea, like, that, I mean, it's actually kind of like the same thing in reverse. It's very symmetrical because Trump is often, like, he's going to jail, he's going to be arrested for treason.
Lock him up.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same,
Same energy, as the kids would say.
Yeah, there's because those people, like, generally pride themselves on being reasonable, and well, we believe in science, so, like, they don't necessarily believe in like clones or stuff like that, or that Trump is doing rituals or whatever.
But they do believe in something that is untrue and is an incredibly heinous lie to push, which is that the CIA and the FBI and people that are like former military contractors that go on MSNBC and spoon feed these shady narratives, and people like John Brennan are like brave patriotic heroes. And forces for progressive good in the world is incredibly pernicious. And you've seen that effect in real time with the Democratic Party. I mean, they've always been weak and complicit to a degree with, the CIA and covert operations and the fuckery of that nature. But to see them kind of publicly standing these former spooks and FBI guys and taking their word for it when it's like, these are people that are trained to lie to you and create false narratives that manipulate you. And, it's like it's all too easy. I mean, they've been kind of grooming the media really since like the 50s. The media's never been like an independent, objective organ of power and influence, like apart from capital and empire and things of that nature. But you have seen like it's just steadily gotten worse over the years and the decades, where like you might have Carl Bernstein write a critical article about CIA's infiltration of the media and Rolling Stone in the 70s, but now like Carl Bernstein's just going to write about how like a brave CIA source told him that everybody in the Trump administration is going to Gitmo next week. And very serious. And in the meantime, anybody that questions the CIA, also you see the very productive fiction and you've seen it weaponized against like Bernie people, against anybody that's like or further to the left of Bernie. I remember when the fake news memes kind of became sort of public and broadcast on every news outlet in the wake of Pizzagate in early 2017. I forget who did it. It was maybe Facebook hired this very sketchy kind of government PR psyop firm that was run by a woman named Andrea Chalupa, who is like a rabid, like right-wing Ukrainian fascist who is aligned with like the Democrat, has been like a political operative in Washington, and how she had assembled her company had assembled this list, contracted by Facebook to filter out like Russian disinfo websites, and it was like every kind of alternative left kind of thing, like Black Agenda Report and like Consortium News, and things that were like relatively kind of benign and like definitely not like Russian disinformatia programs were just lumped into this like anything that naysays Russiagate. It's like with anybody, it was like the Q people, anybody that questions the heroism and the importance of like what Trump is doing is like a deep state shill, or they're brainwashed.
Yeah, like
and
you're defending the pedos,
Yeah,
like,
you're defending the pedos.
Yeah, like if you're,
to naysay any or question any aspect of Russiagate meant you were either a MAGA chud or you were a Russian, like a useful idiot is actually a very interesting term that was created by Lenin to oppress everybody. Like shit like that. Definitely. You have like Masha Gessen, like the most CIA fucking family in the literary world, and Keith Gessen, who are like, let me tell you about the psychology of Stalin, blah blah blah, and just like using all these ahistorical analogies to like how these evil Russians all they ever do is just brainwash and psyop people. And the
whole thing of like the special knowledge that you see with QAnon is very similar to like the way they use the word like compromat and like stuff like that, like all the words like disinformation, like stuff like
really surprising, like kind of Russophobia wave came back where it was like the embedded programming of that old operating system of anti-communism was still latent in people's brains, and you could just bring it back, and like you had people like Joanne Reed saying that like something about Melania coming from like Soviet Yugoslavia, and it's like like that's why you get paid the big bucks, because you don't know that like
to go with current events, we're recording this on as we kind of mentioned, I guess September 20th, and RGB has just died. And, on the religious end, the sort of the way QAnon, the fervor around it is sort of parallels certain religious impulses. And it's structured like, the reverence towards RBG. She has a kind of secular sainthood for sure.
The amount of pictures I saw, the amount of pictures I saw on Instagram, not criticizing anybody who posted this, but like they were all kind of the most like, I don't know, spooky or spiritually imbued portraits you could find of art, especially with that kind of spooky velvet or like lace glove she was wearing, kind of like in that robe portrait. I mean, it was kind of like this high priestess of liberalism.
I've definitely seen like very like deliberately religious iconography, like, you know, sort of in the style of like saint portraits, like, you know,
oh god, I think maybe the funniest tweet I saw just in the hours after she passed away the other day was somebody saying Etsy's gonna crash. Like the amount of commemorative tote bags and mugs and like sweaters and things like that like liberals are going to be buying is just going to take Etsy down. Which is kind of, that is the energy of the kind of the RBG cult. And I mean, we don't even have to go into kind of the weird, somebody else on Twitter pointed out the kind of that the notorious RBG kind of meme came out of like early 2010s internet culture and was like part of this pattern of like white people talking in like black, like gangsta language as a way to kind of be ironically cool.
Yeah, it's the black Twitter ain't having no Bernie type of thing. Like, I'm not black Twitter, but I read black Twitter, and black Twitter ain't having no Bernie. Or like, it's very
really
much,
cringy kind of stuff.
It and definitely was, yes, but there's definitely parallels, but it's a different type of thing, and neither one are going away. I think that this Q post, you know, he's kind of playing it safe. Like, this is not, and I don't think I think that the big, like, Q predictions or the big Q theories that people kind of pick out as being wild don't necessarily originate in Q's posts themselves. Like, his posts are very impressionistic and, you know, tend to play it more or less safe. You know, I guess he's gotten it wrong on some things because he definitely has said things like trust Sessions, whereas now Sessions and Trump are kind of enemies. But, you know, I think that his prediction that we're going to have, like, a really messy election, it's definitely going to fit. Like, you know, his predictions around the election is definitely going to fit with the reality that we're going to see. Like, people are going to easily be able to apply this to what happens because it's going to be a mess.
For sure. And I think just with, in a way, I think a lot of liberals, and I wouldn't say that, like, you know, this is all unfounded, because I think the odds of a disputed clusterfuck election are very high, but kind of I've noticed almost a level of hysteria around things like mail-in voting and like the subversion of the post office that it just in like the tone and the way they're presented almost like presuppose that this election is going to be a disaster and there's kind of nothing we can do about it. Like that instead of either side kind of productively offering suggestions about how this election could be done less chaotically, it's kind of like both sides are steeling themselves for the fight that they know is going to happen, and like beforehand throwing out as much kind of circumstantial evidence that the other side is cheating as possible, so that when this huge media kind of like multifaceted psyop spectacle happens, the November election, that both sides are going to fight out over these like these very thorny issues of like legitimacy, and it's going to be absolutely disastrous. And I think that I don't know. It's like I think liberals are almost like giving up already that like it's going to be kind of stolen, or you know maybe that's a reflection.
Conservatives as well have. They are very much. I think both sides are very much convinced that the other side is going to try to steal it, and both sides are probably more or less right, because it's going to be like about who can seize control of the narrative, because the counting of the ballots, like, it's not going to go smoothly, and like we only have like, you know, the only people who we can trust about who won are like, you know, the legacy media or whatever, you know, the traditional sort of gatekeepers who can make us information, who most Trump supporters like don't trust. And like,
and a lot of other people don't particularly trust either, or have their problems with.
I just like, you know, no one really trusts them, but in that case, I think a lot of people who don't trust them anyway, like, as long as you don't like Trump, they wouldn't have a problem with it. It's the people who support Trump are going to have the biggest problem with what they say if they say Biden won, you know? And like, if they say Trump won or whatever, or if it seems to be going in that direction for whatever, like Shadi Hamid, I guess, who writes for The Atlantic, you know, he has a lot of, like, you know, his takes run the gamut, and he wrote some article recently that was about, can the Democrats really concede this election, you know, or are they going to be able to do so? And I saw people interpreting it from both sides. You know, Republicans were like, is that a threat or whatever, you know? And Democrats were saying, like, you know, this is the exact opposite of what you need to be worried about, you know? And so just, like, both people were taking it, like, in the exact opposite way. And I think that, you know, that really is a sign that, like, you know, no matter what happens, like, people are going to be, like, in the streets. Like, you know.
No matter what.
You know,
there will be chaos.
If Trump wins, are people really going to put up with it? Like, I don't know.
And
like,
I think if there's, unlike last time where you could be mad all you want, but it's like he cleverly gamed the Electoral College and targeted areas that Hillary didn't target, and it appears that, you know, he won by enough of a margin. Like, there weren't battles over recounts in those states, like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. He won by very slim margins, but then there was almost a kind of believability to the fact that Hillary Clinton ignored a lot of those states and had policies that were very hostile. And in the last month, like, people do forget, like, he ramped up, I think this is probably Bannon's, like, crypto-fash kind of influence of, like, really amp up, like, the NAFTA stuff, the worker stuff, like, just, like, throw out whatever conservative shit you were. I mean, no, it was a lot of conservative stuff still, but the economic conservative argument, like the populism thing, he really hammered, like, nonstop in that last month. And, you know, even liberal hero James Comey had a big part in, like, throwing off Hillary's momentum in those last weeks, which now that Trump fired him, he's a hero. So now there's, like, a Showtime series coming out where, like, Jeff Daniels, reprising his energy from the newsroom, is going to play, like, Saint Comey squaring off against, you know, the Trump man. And, like, there's kind of no consistent. It's just, like, kind of how Mueller switched from, like, hero to villain, like, in the QAnon world. It's like Comey went from villain to hero in the lib world,
in the blue Anon universe. But I think that it's definitely easier to be, like, you know, it's harder to kind of be that viscerally upset about the possibility. Like, you know, people were very hopeful for, like, some people were very hopeful for Hillary and that type of thing, and were very, like, worried about Trump. But I think that with like, you know, the situation we're in with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, like, all this stuff, like, it's going to be more intense this time for sure.
My God. But anyway. There's nothing is, like, nailed to the ground. Everything is kind of, you know, we're in a whirlwind right now. And it is probably the most psychologically kind of unstable time for America's mass consciousness in kind of recent memory.
We have all experienced criminals in one way or another. Criminals, as we know, are those who choose personal gain over the rights of others and have no regard for the law. But here is where you need to expand your thinking. Criminals can also succeed in business and politics, and can be elected as our leaders. If a criminal became the president, imagine what they could achieve. They could use the full weight of their executive power to commit much larger crimes, and ensure they and their friends were enriched to the fullest extent possible. A criminal president could create alliances with other criminal presidents, and then collaborate on more global criminal activities. Anything goes. Drug running, human trafficking, whatever makes the big bucks. The 20th century was turbulent with war, economic disaster, famines, and displacement. We have always accepted these things as just human nature, and simply the way the world works. Something inevitable, and due to the weaknesses of human nature that drive us to these actions. This is where we were all tragically wrong. You are not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. So how can we just assume that it is human nature that is driving all this pain and misery? What if it wasn't human nature at all, and as a result of something more deliberate? We were taught that capitalism was the cause of a massive rich-poor divide and the reason for poverty, which in turn is the reason for war, crime, and starvation. Others were taught that communism, the system of equal wealth across all people, was really to blame for the mess. But you see, folks, it is none of these things. It is not our nature to fight and be racist. It is not in our nature to rob from others. What you must learn is that it was the criminals all along.
The last thing before we go, I wanted to bring up somebody who, like, in line with the thinking of, like, the triangulation of making Trump seem, you know, more involved than he is in taking down the pedos, but also portraying the deep state as kind of, you know, lashing back and still having some powers. So there's still a threat that needs to be confronted. I feel like it's really important to mention the personality that basically both preceded and is now like a major booster of Q, which is former CIA State Department official Steve Pieczenik. Have you heard his name talked about a lot with Q?
No.
Yeah, see, this is one of those weird things where nobody really has followed up on this, even though I'd say even more than Pizzagate, even more than FBI Anon, he was the person in the kind of alternative media at the end of 2016 that most accurately sort of, you know, I don't want to say predicted Q, but behaved in the most similar way and pushed the most similar narrative to Q of anybody. So, like, a little background on Steve Pieczenik, like, I don't know if he does anymore, but in like 2015 and especially in 2016, he was a pretty regular guest on the Alex Jones show on InfoWars. And he's still out there. He's got like 57,000 Twitter followers. But like I said, he worked in the State Department under Nixon and Henry Kissinger in the 70s and also worked for the CIA. He co-wrote a number of books with Tom Clancy in the 90s. And I don't know if he said or others have said that basically Steve Pieczenik was one of the real life inspirations for the Jack Ryan character. So, like, kind of a little bit of a big deal in the spook world. And I think the most interesting thing about Steve Pieczenik that he's actually basically admitted to and also been accused by an Italian court of being involved in is the kidnapping and murder of Prime Minister Aldo Moro in Italy in the late 1970s, the Christian Democrat prime minister who was ostensibly abducted by the Red Brigades, a communist underground, militant movement, and was eventually killed by the Red Brigades. And this is after Aldo Moro had proposed forming a coalition government with the Italian Communist Party, which the forces of NATO wanted to prevent at all costs. And basically, I think sometime in the 2000s, Pieczenik wrote an op-ed basically saying, like, yep, I did it. We were involved in that and we were complicit. And like, I think in getting the details, like, was he actually, was it a group like kind of impersonating the Red Brigades, or the Red Brigades kind of being used for something they didn't quite understand, or was his management behind the scenes sort of designed to make it like almost inevitable that the Red Brigades would kill him by basically refusing to negotiate and provoking the Red Brigades to doing that, which would accomplish a very important objective for them. He's also bragged on InfoWars, I remember back in 2016, about using rock and roll music and the distribution of radios, particularly to Soviet Navy sailors that were visiting neutral or Western ports. And the promotion of Western-style rock and roll was part of a PSYOP campaign that he was involved in to undermine the Soviet Union in the mid to late 1980s. So that's something that probably can deserve an entire episode. I'm very interested in like Soviet rock music in the 80s and how some of it became very like wrapped up in perestroika and other things like that. But basically, like, I mean, if you're coming from kind of a left perspective, that means immediately, why the hell would you ever trust this guy? who was like on the highest, deepest levels of like Operation Gladio chicanery in Europe in the 70s, and anti-communist psyops in the 80s. But if you think about kind of the anti-communist psyop elements of Q, it kind of syncs up. But what I'm even more specifically kind of referring to with Pieczenik is that he kind of infamously went on Alex Jones maybe a week before the election, and he announced that a counter-coup against the Clintons had been launched by patriotic officials in the military and the intelligence community who basically wanted Trump to win because they were aware of all of the deep, sadistic corruption of the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. And they apparently, according to Pieczenik, had discovered a plot for the Clintons to rig the 2016 election. And so they had launched their own counter coup against the Clinton coup to basically ensure that it honestly sounds a little up in the air.
They were going to rig red. They were going
to rig for red. Exactly.
Yeah.
And he at the time, because this was at the peak fervor of Pizzagate, he tied it to the story that was being floated by Eric Prince, the Blackwater mercenary and brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, child of, what was it, the Amway fortune or something, like billionaire children, basically. He went on Breitbart Radio and said that his sources in the NYPD had discovered shocking and sick, depraved content on Anthony Weiner's seized laptop. And that basically Pieczenik referred to this and tied it all together as basically, we've uncovered their financial corruption, their political corruption, their war crimes, and their child trafficking rings. And the patriots inside of the government have had enough, and we are not going to let her steal this election. And then Trump won like 5 or 6 days later. So I think and I've looked at actually I just wanted to read real briefly surprisingly from the one of these conspiracy it's not our conspiracy, but it was like conspiracy commons, which I guess is maybe, I don't know if it's an offshoot of our conspiracy, but somebody named American Rye posted this 1 month ago, and I think it's actually like an interesting way to frame Steve Pieczenik and Q. So this is called Steve Pieczenik and QAnon, and says, I have recently become aware of Steve Pieczenik and have since viewed many of his videos on YouTube. What I started to realize is that this man, who claims connections to high-level U.S. intelligence, was basically a reinvention of the Q persona. If we were to assume the government actively targets potential dissidents, either through agitprop or controlled opposition, then we would expect the right and the left to be targeted at some level, and likely with individual approaches. In Steve's videos and Alex Jones' interviews, he makes countless warnings to conservatives that a struggle is underway to save the country, a fight against good and evil, right versus left, always in support of Trump and in line with the comeback hero narrative. He's allegedly a CIA and Pentagon intelligence officer with directed mission of performing agitprop and destabilizing techniques in foreign countries. Rather than be ashamed of his past, he wears it proudly. In regards to Q, I'd like to share an alleged Q-related video featuring the familiar white rabbit and showing a gentleman by the name of Colonel Kuster. And he shows a video. Kuster shows in this video a white rabbit offering the metaphorical red pill or blue pill. The white rabbit invokes you down the hole with options that are very...
I'm just picturing this right now. It's really something.
Yeah, they did use the white rabbit a lot. Q did. I forgot early on. And, a lot of Matrix references, obviously. So the white rabbit invokes you down the hole with options that are very dualistic, in essence, forcing a Hegelian dialectic in the backdrop of military authority. Searching for that name on Google eventually finds the following document by a Colonel Sean Kuster. Other articles indicate Kuster is lead in command at Army Garrison Benelux, a multinational base in Brussels, not too far from NATO headquarters. In the paper, Kuster discusses national strategic theory for a class at the Army War College, focusing on how to predict future threats in the, quote, gray zone. Colonel Kuster proceeds to discuss the need at the strategic level to look for trends in non-state actors, events that would precipitate a black swan event but not occur in the direct periphery of a military establishment. This is basically the modus operandi of QAnon, the controlled narrative and feeding of the disillusioned right. It's couched in the language of conspiracy theories to entice the suspicious, and bearing the savior complex to capture the faithful. Its pseudo-puzzle drops invoke the military, a sort of call to action, and embellish embellished for the detail-oriented. The Qster report is basically intended to imply a fight to disrupt globalism at the basic QAnon interpretation, but could easily apply to the basic rationale for fabricating a Q-like persona online. The government would need to predict future threats, including public sentiment trends, and act to kneecap them, essentially. Trend analysis and large data, probably like analyzing places like R Conspiracy and other internet sites where non-mainstream ideas are discussed, would probably indicate an emerging anti-government backlash on many levels. It would also be useful pending any sudden direct social shock, especially a financial collapse, to disarm the potential prime actors who could rebel, and typically those are on the right. He says Steve is a caricature of QAnon, an authority figure espousing a savior complex aimed at managing the online conspiracy theorist type that support Trump. His angle is, quote, high-level intelligence. He was and likely still is a counterintelligence agent, this time playing a false role online. And it's worth noting that, like, the first responses to this are, no, I think he sounds rather genuine. Playing such a false role online would be self-defeating. Why on earth would they do that? And a bunch of other people being like, oh, if you think Steve Pieczenik's fake, then listen to this interview. So clearly it's kind of, you're fighting an uphill battle with the Q people questioning these very real, suspicious kind of background of Steve Pieczenik. But I think that was kind of a pretty good, I want to look at this like Qster thing, but I think they're kind of getting at like maybe like closest to how I feel about people like Steve Pieczenik and this QAnon universe and this idea of managing a culture of conspiracy theory that you can weaponize for specific political purposes. Yeah.
I think that it definitely resonated as something that sounds viable. And I think that there's definitely those aspects to it. It's a very, like I said, it's a very archetypal and very emblematic aspect of our current moment and something that I think is going to be with us for a while, and we've gone through some of its transformations in the podcast today, but I think that there's going to be further transformations that will make this look tame, I think.
And I will say that guy's invocation of the Hegelian dialectic, I think, actually does check out. In the broader,
you mean when you do Antifa to destroy a suburb? No, sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Though, of course, I mean... going against that, I think I forgot to mention earlier that, I think one of these Freedom First Network Q people claimed that at a 2014 Marine Corps like commemorative dinner in which Donald Trump was given an award, General Joseph Dunford recruited Trump to run for president. So this has all been the generals all along,
right,
running. And probably Steve Pieczenik, who's a patriot who we should trust. Mm-hmm. Michael Flynn.
Trump gave it all up. He had everything. He was, he gave it all up just to fight the pedos, at the urging of the patriotic generals. But it's interesting. I think that, many things are dialectical and, might be that we perceive them this way because of the influence of Hegel and of the influence of Marx as well. But definitely there's like this sort of pincer aspect to it. And I think that these people are aware of these kind of formulations and they use dialectics in their approach to implementing these things as well. So,
of course. I think there's so many, we've already discussed so many instances throughout this podcast of how they look at something overseas that ostensibly another country that is Marxist is doing, and then they sort of take they get inspired by the own straw man version of that they kind of cook up in their heads, and then reapply it back at home, towards the goal of reinforcing the status quo and ruling class domination, and to embed it deeper. So even something as fundamental as a dialectical materialism or the Hegelian dialectic. I mean, it's does behind closed doors Mike Sheuer actually understand dialectics, or
I don't know about him, but definitely some people.
I think smarter people that don't
somewhat genuine, but maybe definitely some do, and even other theory as well, Deleuze, I'm sure. is definitely used and known by these people, like, concepts like deterritorialization, stuff like that. And I think that even if you take it on an esoteric level, like Baphomet, as we've discussed, he's a dialectical figure who's, embodies the composition of opposites,
right.
And even Satan himself, appears as an angel of light and that type of stuff. That's why, even from the beginning, it's very hard to, pin down the sides and, hope that we've, communicated it well in this podcast, but part of it is, the seductiveness and the sense of righteousness and the sort of the being on the side of good versus evil, but really that's part of the seductions that are used often by forces that are evil, for lack of a better word.
Totally. And let's not
for lack of a better one.
Sure, but yeah, I mean, I guess we can't really. We shouldn't underappreciate the strong desire on just a basic human level of wanting to sort of understand the forces of good and evil in the world and being aligned with the good side. You have to sort of forego so much psychological peace and serenity and sanity to start to think about the things that I think we talk about all the time, that require constant critical analysis and weighing things that you can't quite make a decision on. And I think something like Q, or even being a Mueller stan, they offer you this very Manichaean, easy narrative, this crude, vulgar dialectic of the world, and you can know what side to get onto. And
it's interesting how you can take it kind of from the angle of both of our kind of, little wheelhouses, because, it's also, they're delving into, spiritual, they're dealing with spirituality, but a lot of the time, I mean, it's in a vulgar way, and a lot of times they don't even realize that that's what they're dealing with, because there isn't the sort of experience or the knowledge, and they're dealing with it in a, they're unprepared to kind of delve into these things that are these great questions, these great problems of human existence on this planet, and this is a spiritual movement that they're in many ways people are going along with, but it's in the same way that there's that kind of warnings about tampering with Ouija boards or whatever, being unprepared, trying to meddle with this stuff. I think that there's that aspect to these kind of things as well. You might have good intentions, but yeah.
And it almost makes me think that maybe this is sort of a problem in the sort of modernist Western tradition. It doesn't require the total kind of qualitative understanding of a sort of social technology, say a spiritual belief or an actual type of technology, in order to successfully weaponize it and use it as a weapon. Because I feel like that's kind of you could see the dialectic being borne out in NATO's strategy of tension. That's almost, it seems like it maps on very closely to even what Michael Sheuer says of that's when you you sow chaos on both sides. And then the idea of the strategy of tension was that they would run to the security state and the government for support. You see that in 9/11 as well. And by maybe having some control of the Red Brigades and the neo-fascists in propaganda due and the security services, and have them engineer events or provoke events to happen that cause these two sides that create lots of chaos, and then people have to go running for a sense of psychic safety somewhere. So it's in that seems like a very vulgar way of reading Marx's dialectics or his materialism, but nonetheless a somewhat effective weapon, even though they're ripe to misunderstand. So maybe Michael Sheuer has that crude conception of dialectics because maybe he was involved in Operation Gladio and thinks of it just as that's when you cynically just play both sides against each other and cause a lot of violence and chaos. And then the national security state takes over. I think if you put it in the Cold War context, he might be totally down with it, but now he thinks that Soros individually is running it. So it needs to be stopped. And but when they were Marx did it with an evil end, or Marxist Leninists did it with an evil end, but he's just I don't know.
And I think that something similar takes place with QAnon. I think this kind of came out in some aspects of our conversation where, to oppose it, if you're like some dude, your wife is like, honey, like you're getting carried away with this QAnon stuff. Like now your wife is all of a sudden like defending like the worst thing, like in like it's really like, it's Manichaean. Like it's hyper dialectical.
Maybe even a way like more Hegelian than Marxist, because it puts kind of the prime mover status on like ideas and spirit. And if you think about how like social media protests and like the Twitter revolutions and the Facebook revolutions and Anonymous and QAnon and all these things like operate, it's basically it's meme driven.
Yeah.
In a way, it is meme magic because they're conjuring these like thought forms and then using them to like influence people and bring people into this like online mega horde that then can go out and influence the real world. So in a way, it's like flipping Marx back on its feet, or whenever flipping Hegel back over.
That has always been, this is unorthodox Marxism, but it's always been implied in Marx. Like this whole binary of, this is a dialectic of material versus spiritual, which like doesn't like hold up. This is something that like we need to accept that there, like that intuition or that idea, I definitely subscribe to, that the material and the spiritual binary is not helpful, and especially in like the universe that we live in now, where we're, with the internet and with the kind of virtual nature of our the way that we exist and the way that we interact socially, like something that tries to be material at the expense of the spiritual, or to jettison the spiritual and thereby be material, isn't sufficient. And I think that is. I take a strong stance with that. I think there's a lot of value in Marx, but I will say definitely that, like, the spiritual needs to be accounted for, and anything that doesn't attempt to deal with this component is going to be inadequate. And
I am compelled by that read on it, and I think that even if perhaps this is not as obvious in the late 19th century, but now that we live in a world where our lives are literally mediated every day through this kind of technological spirit world, the internet that has been created, that is full of like daemons and like idea ghosts and things like that do influence people in the material reality, that there's room there perhaps for some like updated kind of clarification of like kind of how dialectics practically work, or instead of putting kind of like a pyramid where like the base like always like creates the superstructure, and not to fundamentally undermine like those concepts, but it's almost like there is a dialectic going on between the spiritual and the material itself, in addition to like the internal dialectics of the material world. And you can't just think that it's just the material world that is functioning dialectically. Like the two are no longer just kind of separate spheres of influence, or one is not on top of the other. They're more cybernetically linked now in a literal and figurative way.
To use another like stock theoretical term, like they're always already interacting. They're always already interacting.
Wow.
Yeah, and so where materialism goes one, spiritualism goes all. Basically, I guess you could
say where they go one, they go all.
Yeah.
And I think we could leave it there for now. I'm sure Q will, once like Q terrorism happens in 2021, we'll talk about it again.
But future proves past.
Future proves past. That's our 2 delta that we're dropping. That's our breadcrumb. But I hope this was an informative ride through a very, very strange phenomenon.
One last thing. I looked up Israel Shamir, and he's Christian. Never was Muslim, so we don't have anything to do with him.
Okay, fair enough.
Nominally.
And I would add that it probably makes him more sus, because, like, what kind of Christian is he?
And, Norman Finkelstein said that he made up his entire backstory, so who knows if he even was Jewish, But anyway, So
fascinating.
Just throwing that out there.
Keep giving those Bitcoin donations to the Assange Fund, guys. He's a hero. Much like Q, our future depends on him not going to jail for like sexual harassment charges or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, not to be glib, but I'm a little over it. It's been a rough decade online.
It has been.
I don't trust anybody. All right, well, dear listeners, until next time, stay vigilant.
Peace.
Crooked bankers, Rothschilds on the run. Deep state players, we know what you've done. A light is coming in, expose your every sin as the mainstream media lies come undone. Here's a great man that drives them all insane, and he's gonna make America great again. I really want to introduce you to my friend Q and the people of the Great Awakening. Not long ago, as we all know, the CIA and NSA recorded every step we made. Surveillance state recorded everything we say, tracking everything we do every single day. Our privacy stolen by the deep state. They didn't hide their crimes, that's a very big mistake. They didn't think about the good guys in the NSA, cause they thought that Hillary would be the president today. Here's a message to all my friends. Let me tell you about something that's happening, about a movement called the Great Awakening. The QAnon phenomenon is going mainstream. This time is coming round to use the evidence and bring them down, and we'll all just laugh as they fall and crawl, cause where we go one, we go all. Trump's in his ears all the proof of the crime, and it's gonna be released all in good time. But first let's drain the swamp, clean the dump, expose the lies, get the lying dirty judges out. Then we'll shine the light until there's no end, and show Obama light to get a FISA warrant. The DNC and Hillary's fight illegally on the Trump campaign and his family. That's a major crime, you see. They lost their power, they can't defend. We're witnessing the beginning of their end. These people are stupid, they can't pretend, cause they never thought that Trump would win. Now crippled and scared, and they know they're screwed, and all they have left is a bunch of fake news. It won't fix this mess, they're all out of luck, and nothing will work. See on inside. Here's a message to all my friends. Let me tell you about something that's happening, about a movement called the Great Awakening. The QAnon phenomenon is going mainstream. This time is coming round to use the evidence and bring them down, and we'll all just laugh as they fall and crawl, cause where we go one, we go all. The deep state wants to win the next election, try to take control of the House and the Senate, try to stop Trump and Q and all the decisions, but their voting bases indicate hashtag walk away. Remember now, this is just the start, cause it's all coming down like a house of cards. There's more people going down in due time, like all the dirty CEOs that resigned. They'll try to keep everyone in the dark with the use of Hollywood, Susan, Jack, and Mark to hide the fact that they're all evil and sick, child trafficking, pedophiles, Satanists. Their time is up, soon they won't even exist. Military trials, seal indictments, God's justice being served for all their sins. Their time is up, that's all, that's it. Here's a message to all my friends. Let me tell you about something that's happening, about a movement called the Great Awakening. The QAnon phenomenon is going